In this video, we'll build a simple Perplexity clone. Users can ask questions and receive responses based on online sources. We'll use Flutter for the frontend and FastAPI with the Gemini API for the backend. The aim of this video is to give you a solid foundation to build a more complex AI-powered application. Let's get started. So we'll get started by opening up our terminal and then typing in cd desktop. This is the place where I want to create my project. After that, I'm going to run the command flutter create followed by the name of my project. I'm going to call this perplexity underscore clone and then hit enter. So a Flutter project with the name of perplexity clone will be installed in my system. After that, I'm going to migrate to that particular folder and then open it in Visual Studio Code. You can open this project in any other IDE if you want, but I'm going to go ahead with VS Code because I just prefer doing it over there. Then I'm just going to close this welcome tab, go to the lib folder, main.dart file, and here I'm first going to run my project. Just to ensure that everything's working well, the Flutter environment is set up correctly for me. So before writing any code, we'll just ensure everything works. So I'm going to switch the device from Mac OS to Chrome and then run the project. And the project runs successfully. That means the entire Flutter setup process is done correctly. Now the reason I ran this project on Chrome instead of any other device like Android emulator or iOS simulator is because this is primarily a web-based project. I'm going to be developing the app by testing on web. I'm not going to be testing on iPhone or Android, so it was essential that I check everything works perfectly on web first. Alright, now what I'm going to do is remove all the boilerplate code. So we have the entire home page. I'm going to remove that. I don't want to build a counter application. We want to create Perplexity clone. That's why I'm going to remove all the comments as well. And now I need to create the home page which I can attach to the material app over here. So I'm going to open the file explorer. In the lib folder itself, we're going to create a folder called pages. And in this we have a new file called homepage.dart. We're not going to be following any complex architecture. We are just focusing on getting a Perplexity clone project up and running. So we are just going to have a simple pages folder, a simple widgets folder. No feature-wise development or architecture is followed over here. Now after that, in the home page, we are just going to create a stateless widget as of now. Let's call this home page. And then we can return a scaffold. And in this scaffold, we can have a body with a centered child widget of text. Let's just call it hello world. Alright. Then we can save the file. Now we can go to the main.dart file and here attach the home page. And with this, we should be expecting a centered text widget, and that's what we get. I'm also going to maximize this Flutter demo screen. And now we can focus on what needs to change. So the first thing is that I don't want the background to be white. I want it to be a Perplexity style background. And we need all the colors related to Perplexity. And to get all those colors, you can simply go to the link I've mentioned in the description below. That will get you the colors that are used throughout the application. So we can just copy this class of app colors where background, side nav, search bar, all of these things are present. And then we can open up our own explorer, and in this lib folder, we are going to create a new folder called theme. And in this theme, we are going to have colors.dart. So this is going to specify all the colors that are going to be in our application, and these are the colors. They are stored within the app colors class, and all of them are static properties. By static, I mean that we don't have to create an instance of this class to access these properties, because otherwise usually we need to create an instance of the class so that we can access a property. But now we don't have to do something like app colors dot background. What we can do is simply app colors dot background and we'll be able to access it. Now the reason we have all the colors enclosed in one particular class is because if I want to change the theming of my application, I can just edit one color over here and the changes will be reflected everywhere this color is used. For example, this background color, if it is used in home page, if it is used in chat screen or anywhere else, and then I decide that I want to change the theming of my application, I can simply change it over here and the changes will be reflected everywhere else. Now background was not the proper example that I should have taken because we're just going to specify background color in one place and it will be reflected in all the pages. But consider any other color, for example, icon gray. If it is used in 10 different places, and then I decide that I want to change the color of how an icon gray color looks like, I can just change it over here, right? So this is a very centralized place which gives me a lot of control. So anyways, coming back to our application, we can go to the main.dart file, and here as you can see we have theme, right? I want to remove this theme so that we don't follow the theme that Flutter gives by default, and we use our own theme. And for our own theme, we are just going to do theme data like this, and then we can specify the scaffold background color over here. Scaffold background color will specify what the background color of the scaffold should be like. So it will change the scaffold color like this color everywhere in our application. So we're going to have app colors.background color specified over here. Now if I save it, come over here, as you can see, it's kind of black. It's the same color that Perplexity uses. Now we have several other things that we can add in the theme, but I'm going to leave it as of now and come back to it as and when required. Alright, so this is our theme data for now. Now we can go to the home page, and now let's see how we want to design this application. To understand what we need to build, let's take a reference image of what we want to build. So this is the Perplexity clone that we're going to build, right? So we can look at the structure and understand how the layout of our app is going to look like. On the left hand side, we have a nav bar, and in this nav bar, we have multiple icons. Then we have the rest of the page, and in this rest of the page, we have a text at the top, then we have a search bar, and then we have a footer. So essentially, we have a row where we have a child as the nav bar, and then we have a column where we have three elements: the text, the search bar, and then the footer. So let's get started. In the home screen, instead of having a centered text now, we are going to have a row. And in this row, we are going to have children, and the first child is going to be the side nav bar, right? So I can just put in a comment of side nav bar. We are going to create the side nav bar in just a minute. After that, we are going to have the search section. So this is going to contain the text and the search bar. And after that, we're going to have the footer. And this search section and footer are going to be within a column because, as we know it, these two things are below each other. They're not horizontally laid out, they're vertically laid out. So that's why we're going to have a column over here where we're going to pass in children, and then in this children we have search section and footer. So now let's go ahead and create the side nav bar. So I'm going to open up my Explorer, and here in the lib folder, we're going to create a new widgets folder. And then we are going to specify the widget. It's going to be the side nav bar or sidebar, whatever you want to call it. So this sidebar is just going to be a simple stateless widget, and we can just call this sidebar. After that, we are going to return a container from here, because essentially what is this sidebar? It is a container with a certain fixed width and a particular color. So here we can specify the width of, let's say, 64, and then we can specify the color. Let's call this color app colors dot sidebar color or side nav. Then we can hit enter, and now I can just go to the home page, and where I have side nav bar, I can just put sidebar and make sure you import stuff correctly. After that, we can come over here, and as you can see, we have our sidebar. That's nice. Now I need to add various icons to it. So in this container, we're going to have a child where there's going to be a column, and in this column we have children. And in this, we're going to have multiple icons. For example, this icon, all the other icons that you can see, and then at the bottom, this particular icon. So let's go ahead and create an icon over here. And this icon is going to be icons.AutoAwesomeMosaic, because that is the one that I've used over here. And then if I just hit save, we'll be able to see the icon over here. Now this color is black. We don't want black, so we need to change that color. So we can specify the color over here of colors.white, or actually I can just use app colors.white, and I've not mentioned it over here. So let me go into the class and add the white color. So we're going to have a static constant white color, which is equal to colors.white. Then I can hit save. I can go to the sidebar, and here we're going to have app colors.white color. Then I come back over here and I see the icon. Now this icon is pretty small compared to this icon, so I'm just going to increase the size as well. Let's put it as 40 or something, and then hit enter. This is much bigger. I don't think we want this big, so we can put it as 30, then save it. And yeah, this looks good, but there's no margin from the top or anything. So what I'd like to do is first just put a constant sized box of height, let's say 16 from the top, and then hit save. And as you can see, this looks good. Now I can just copy this icon and paste it again. So we have another icon, and this can be the add icon. Then the color is going to be icon gray. Then I can hit save, and yep, this icon shows up, but it's pretty big. So what I like to do is decrease the size and then hit save. And yeah, this looks great. Now I'd like to leave some space between the icon that's at the top and the plus icon. So I can take the size box and add another one. Let's call this 24, then hit save. And yeah, that's nice. Now I'd just like to add a bunch of other icons. The next icon we're going to add is the search icon. So there we go, hit save. This icon is kind of stuck with the plus icon. I don't want that. I want there to be spacing between the two. And I want this between almost all of the icons that I have from now on. So what I can do is wrap this icon with a container widget. And in this container, I can specify the margin property, which is edgeinsets.symmetric. From the vertical direction, I just want to pass in 4. Then hit save. And I can do the same for this add icon. So I can just have a container with a margin of edgeinsets.symmetric 4 and then save it. But 4 doesn't have that big of an effect, so I can just change this to 14, let's say. And this has more of an effect. Let's try to do more of these. So we have another icon. Let's call this language. And then we have another icon. Let's call this auto awesome. And finally, we can put our next icon, which is keyboard arrow right. Now, none of these icons are even remotely similar to what Perplexity has to offer. So if you want their exact icon, you can go to their website and extract those. We are just using the built-in icons that are present. And actually, this doesn't have to be keyboard arrow right. It needs to be cloud outlined. So I can just save it like that. And there we go. So these options look good. Now finally what I need is an arrow over here. The arrow right that I just added, I need to add it over here in the bottom. So to do that, I can simply copy paste what I already had, and now we can just have keyboard arrow right. But if I just do this much, we have another icon over here. I want this at the bottom, right? So to push it at the bottom, what I can do is specify a constant spacer widget. So this will create a flexible space which we can have between all of these widgets. And as you can see, this is pushed right at the bottom. Now, if you think this is very much at the bottom and you want it a little bit up, what you can do is specify a constant size box of height 16 again. So you can take this size box and paste it over here. And now this will go a little bit up. Now, if you want a feature where when this button is clicked on, the sidebar will expand, we can do that. So to do that, we'll have to convert the stateless widget to a stateful widget. And after that, we're going to create a property that will keep track of whether this sidebar is collapsed or not. So we can have a variable called isCollapsed, which is equal to, let's say initially it is true, right? Because this is collapsed. When we click on this, the sidebar is not collapsed. And now whenever the user clicks on this particular keyboard right arrow icon, we can change this is collapsed to true or false. So I can wrap this container widget with a gesture detector widget, which on tap will do the following. It will set state, so the build function will rebuild, basically triggering this entire rebuild of this widget. And then we can have is collapsed equal to not is collapsed. So what this statement will do is reverse the value that is collapsed contains. So if is collapsed is true, it will change it to false. If it is false, then it will change it to true. So if the sidebar is collapsed, it will expand it. And if it is expanded, it will collapse it. And now I can go at the top and put in a condition over here. So if is collapsed is true, then it's going to be 64. Otherwise, it's going to be 128. And I can save it. I can come back over here. And now if I click on it, as you can see, the sidebar expands. But it doesn't feel very smooth. So to make it smooth, we can convert this into an animated container widget that will allow us to animate the widget. And then we need to specify a duration property for this. So with a container, you don't have to specify this, but with an animated container, this is a required property. So how much duration do we have for this to animate? So we're going to specify the milliseconds as, let's say, 500. Then we can save it and we come back over here. Let's expand the widget now. And as you can see, this is quite smooth. Now, if we want, we can reduce the timing so that it looks even better. And now, yep, this looks much better. And obviously, if you want to experiment with more values, go ahead, do it. Whatever one you prefer, you can just keep that. I just prefer 100 milliseconds. Now, the thing is, if the sidebar is expanded, these icons and their behavior needs to change. So what we need to do is, if the sidebar is not collapsed anymore, we need to increase the height of this icon. We need to make sure that we have additional text over here. For example, add, search, search web, or something like that. And we add options for each one of them. And also we need to change this icon to the left pointing arrow, which suggests that you need to collapse the sidebar. So let's just change this particular icon first. We can scroll down and here convert this container to an animated container as well. Then I'm going to specify a duration of constant duration milliseconds 100. And here I can check if is collapsed, then we want icons.keyboard arrow right. Otherwise, we want icons.keyboard arrow left. Then we can save it, come back over here. The next thing I want to do is, if is collapsed is true, I want to put these set of icons onto the left hand side. So as of now, in the column, you'll notice that the default property of cross-axis alignment is center. So over here, they're all centered, but we don't want it to be centered. We want it to go on the left hand side whenever the sidebar is expanded. That means they're not collapsed. So here I'm going to specify a cross-axis alignment and put in a condition. If is collapsed, then I want the default condition. So I'm just going to pass in a null over here. But if it is not collapsed, then it's going to be cross-axis alignment dot start. And as you can see, we get an error over here because cross-axis alignment cannot be null. So I need to pass in cross-axis alignment dot center. Then we can save it, come back over here, and yes, all of them shift to the left-hand side. Now the reason I shifted all of them to the left-hand side is because I want to add text over here. Now if we go to the Perplexity's original website, perplexity.ai, you'll notice these are the options they have: home, discover, spaces, and library. That's what we want to fit over here. And also we want to add a little bit of padding whenever the is collapsed part changes. So what I can do is, in the container here, we have passed in edge_sets.symmetric vertical 14, right? Here we can also specify horizontal, and let's say it is 10. Now if it is 10, we can expand it, and as you can see, this plus icon takes its place correctly where it should be. And we need to do this for all of the icons. So we can just take this and paste it for each of them. And once that's done, we can save it and we can come back to our application. Everything is aligned properly now. Now the next thing I want to do is wrap each of these icons in a row so that we can add text horizontally laid out to each of them. So we're going to wrap this container with a row widget. So we're going to wrap it with row, and then we can specify a text that says, let's say home. And then we're going to style it. So we're going to have a style of text style. Then we're going to have a font size, let's say 20, and font weight is font weight.bold. Then we can save it. And as soon as the website restarts, we have an error because we are displaying this text even when the sidebar is not expanded, it is collapsed. So we don't want to show it over there, but for now it's fine. And as you can see, home shows up properly. That's good. We want to change the color though. So we can go to the main.dart file and change this overall for all the text that we are going to add in our application. And we're not just going to change the theme by specifying a color. What we are going to do is also specify the font family that we are going to use. And to specify the font family, we are going to use a package called Google Fonts. So to add that package to our Flutter application, we can press Command-Shift-P, type in dart add dependency, and here we can specify Google_fonts. And with this, we have a package that will allow us to specify almost any font that we want. So here we're going to specify the text theme, and the text theme is going to be Google Fonts. So make sure you import that package .enter theme. So with this, a font family is applied to all the text that will be present in our application. So all of them will be of the type of enter text theme, but still it doesn't fix our problem. It's still black. Well, we want to change that, so we can specify a text theme over here. So the text theme is going to be theme_data.dark.text theme, right? And if we do just that much, as you can see, home shows up with a white color. Why does this work? Well, that's because in the enter text theme, it allows us to pass in any text theme that we want. And when we do theme_data.dark, what we're asking for is a theme where everything is dark mode. And when there's dark mode, by default, Flutter will provide a white colored font. So we just access that dark mode's text theme, so it changes that color to white. And when we expand it, everything looks good. Now, if this feels a little out of place for the text, we can decrease its size and do all other sorts of things like pass in 18, and I guess that would look better. If you want, you can also change this to gray. So the next thing is just ensuring that this text only shows up when it is collapsed. So we can just have if isCollapsed is true, then we are going to have a constant sized box widget. We are not going to display anything, just a sized box that isn't anything. Otherwise, we are going to display a home widget. And with this, the text disappears, but this icon is forever in the left-hand side. Now to fix it, there are multiple ways. I'm going to use the easiest route, and that is by specifying the main axis alignment to be main axis alignment.center over here. Now if the website restarts and I come over here, the home text disappears. And if I try to expand it, as you can see, this plus icon is still in the center because I specified the row's main axis to be centered. So here again, we can add a condition of isCollapsed. So if isCollapsed is true, then main axis alignment.center. Otherwise, we want it to be main axis alignment.start. Then I can save the file. Everything works as before now. So that's good. Now we want to do this for every single icon. So what I'm going to do is take this row widget and extract it in a widget of its own. And we're just going to create that widget over here. So we have sidebar button.dart. Then we're going to create a simple stateless widget. Let's call it sidebar button. Then we can return this particular widget that we copied, the row. Then we need to ask for the isCollapsed value from the constructor. So we have final boolean is collapsed. Then we'll require it from the constructor. We will import the app colors package. We are also going to import the text present over here, and we're also going to import the icon. So we are going to have final icon data. Let's call this icon. That will be asked from the constructor. And finally, we are going to have the text present over here. So we are going to have final text. Then I'm going to click on the bulb icon and generate a constructor. Also, this comment that pops up, we can remove that. Then we can remove this key kind of thing and just do super.key. Also, we can remove the super class. And yeah, that's good. Now I can come back to the sidebar and pass in the sidebar button just like that. Then isCollapsed value is passed in. The icon is going to be icons.add. I think that was the icon that I added. And the text can be home. And we have an error because we need to accept a string, not a text. So that's nice. Yep, that's done. Now I can also replace the icon over here. So instead of icons.add, we have icon. And instead of this home, we have the text passed over here. Great. Now we can go to the sidebar and we can save this. So we see things the same way, but yeah, things have changed. Now I can take the sidebar button and paste it for each and every one of them. So instead of having this container, we are going to have icons.get search, and we can specify search over here. The same thing goes for the next container. Instead of icons.language over here, we can paste it over here. And we can just call this spaces or whatever you want to call it. After that, we can paste this sidebar button again. And we can call this icons.autoAwesome. This can be discover. And then we can remove this container. Finally, we can take this sidebar button, and instead of discover, we are going to have library, and we can pass in cloud outline. Then I can remove this container, save it, restart the entire thing. And if I expand the sidebar now, everything shows up. That's great. Everything seems to work well. The last thing I want to do is increase the logo height over here. So instead of this icon manually showing up, I want to increase its height and width. Again, check over here if is collapsed. If it is collapsed, then 30. Otherwise, we can make it 60, let's say. And now if I save it, expand it. Yep, this looks good enough. I still want this to be centered though, right? This icon shouldn't be on the left-hand side. It should be centered. So what we can do for this is take these two constant size box and the icon out of the column. Then we are going to wrap this column with another column, and in this column we can specify our icon and the sized box. So what we have is a column with a size box and an icon, and after that we have a column again where all of the icons are present. And this column can be expanded, so we can just wrap it with an expanded widget so that we don't get an error later on. And yeah, now if I expand it, everything works well. The reason it works well is because this column by default centers everything, but then comes along this column, and this column looks at the is collapsed and centers accordingly. So this icon is centered, but all of these icons are on the left hand side. So yeah, that is how we can manage the toggling of our sidebar. Now if you want, you can also take this icon that's present outside of the column. So this gesture detector thing that we had along with the size box, this can go in the outer column. So we can paste it over here, and if we come back, as you can see, this is centered. It's no longer on the left hand side. And another thing we can do is increase the width over here. Let's say we pass it 150. Now if I expand everything, everything looks good. So yeah, we are done with the sidebar. Now let's go ahead and work on the real thing in this application, the search box. So we can close all the save files, go to the home page, and here we have search section, right? This search section is going to contain the text and the search bar. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new widget over here. Let's call this search_section.dart. And this is going to be a simple stateless widget as of now. We can just call this search section. Then it is going to return a column, because in this search section we have two things, right? A text and the search bar. So for the text, we can go ahead and style it. So we have text where we are going to specify where knowledge begins. Then we can save this. We can take this search section and put it in the home page instead of this comment. Now if I go back to the web page, we have where knowledge begins written over here. Now what I want to do with this text is first of all center it. So I want to go in the column and specify the main axis alignment as main axis alignment.center. Then save it, and as you can see, nothing happens. And that's because this column only takes this much size in the entire application. It is not taking the height of the entire web page. It is only taking this much space, and it is centered in this much space. So to make this work properly, what we'll have to do is temporarily we're going to add a container over here, and the container cannot be a const. This container will have a height of, let's say, 20 as of now. Then we can take the search section and wrap it with an expanded widget, so that we tell that on the entire screen, how much ever height you get, you can take that. And now, as you can see, this where knowledge begins text is centered, because now this search section has the entire height to itself. And now I can specify the style of this text. It's going to be of the type Google Fonts .ibm plex mono. If you want to try any other font that you think looks similar to Perplexity, you can go ahead and try that. I found this to be the most matching. And here we can specify the font size to be 40. The font weight can be fontweight.w400. Then save the file, go back to the Chrome app, and we have where knowledge begins written over here. That's great. We can also specify the height over here to be 1.2. And if you think the letter spacing is kind of bad, you can just increase that as well. So letter spacing is just how much spacing is there between each of the letters. So we can just specify it as minus 0.5, let's say. Now, if you think you want to increase the letter spacing, you can go ahead and remove this negative sign. So this can just be 0.5 and it leaves more space. But I think minus 0.5 is the best. So yeah, now what I'm going to do is leave some spacing between this text and the new search bar that I'm going to add. So I'm going to have a size box of height 32. And after that, I'm going to add a search bar over here. And to create a search bar, I can do that in a separate widget, or if I want, I can do it over here. I'm just going to do it over here. So here I'm going to pass in a container where I need to specify the width, because this thing that you see over here takes a very specific width. And here we're going to pass in, let's say, 700. Then I'm going to pass in the decoration where I'm going to pass in the box decoration. And as of now, the only decoration I'm going to pass is the color. The color is going to be appcolors.searchbar. Save it. And now if I come back over here, we see absolutely nothing. And that's fine. We'll see that later on. But now the next thing I want to get working on is actually incorporating the text field within this container. So I've created a container that has a fixed height. Now I want to add a text field within it. But it's not as easy as it looks. We have a text field, but along with that, we also have a bunch of other options within this container, right? So we have these two options. We even have this send button. So we need a column where we are going to have a text field as the first child, and the second child is going to be a row. And in this row, we have these buttons: focus, attach, and the send button. So here in the container, we're going to specify a child. The child is going to be column. And in this column, we have children. And the first child is just going to be a text field. I'm just using a text field, not a text form field, because I don't have anything to validate. It is not a form. It is just a simple text box where I can pass in stuff and hit enter. Then here, I can specify the decoration, which is going to be input decoration. And the first thing is going to be the hint text. The hint text is going to be search anything ... Then I can save this much, go back, and as you can see, this is our text box. Looks good. Now I want this hint present over here to be styled properly. So I can just have a hint style, which is text style. Then I pass in the color, which is appcolors.textgray. Okay. After that, we're going to have a font size of, let's say, 16. And we're going to save it at this. Good enough. Now the next thing I want is this border to go away. So I can pass in the border to be input border.none. And this border goes away. Now we're going to move away from the text field for a bit and add the other options that we see over here. This particular thing. After this text field, we have a row. And in this row, we have children. And the first child we have here is the button. And this button is also not as easy as it looks. The key component is that when I hover over this button, it basically highlights itself. So we get the nice hover effect over it. So it would be the best choice just to create a separate widget for it. So we are going to have a search bar button .dart file. And here we're going to create a stateful widget because we're going to keep track of whether this widget was hovered on or not. And we're just going to call this search bar button. Then we're going to return a container where we're going to pass in the decoration as box decoration. Then we can pass in the border radius first of all. The border radius is going to be border radius.circular, circular 6. Okay. After that, I can specify the color over here, which is nothing but colors.transparent. We're going to have another color over here, but as of now, this is good enough. Then we're going to have a child where there's going to be a row, children, and the first thing over here is going to be the icon. The icon is, let's say, the plus icon. So we have icons.plus. 1 as of now. Obviously, this icon is going to be taken from the constructor because every search bar button is going to have a different icon. Then we can specify the color, which is appcolors.icon gray. And then we can specify the size to be 20. Then the second component of this row is going to be a text. And this text is also taken from the constructor. As of now, we can just pass in focus. Then we are going to pass in the style, the text style, and the text style is going to be color, appcolors.textgray. Then we can save it. And now I can take this search bar button and put it over here. Now if I go to the screen, there we have our button showing up. But it looks absolutely horrible. We need to change this a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is set up the layout of the search bar button. Basically, we are going to have one search bar button in this row. We are also going to have another one. And between these two search bar buttons, we are going to have a size box of width, let's say 12, and save it. After that, we are going to leave a lot of space because at the end, we are going to have our send button. So when it's clicked on, we search it. So this can be a very simple thing. We're going to have a container with some padding because as you can look at this button, there's a lot of padding. So we can have edgeinsets.all, pass in 9. Then in the decoration, we can pass in box decoration. The color is going to be appcolors dot, and we can pass in the submit button as the color. After that, we're going to specify the border radius, which is going to be border radius dot circular 40, and then save it. Then we're going to have a child, and this child is going to be a constant icon, icons dot arrow underscore forward. We can specify the color, and this color is going to be appcolors dot background. Basically, we have a background color, right? So this icon that we have is going to be the same color as this background color. And then we can specify the size as 16. Then we can save it. And as you can see, our button looks good. Now there are multiple changes we need to make. Let's start by taking these icons properly from the constructor. So we're going to have first of all final icon data coming from the constructor. Then we have the string of text coming from the constructor. Then I'm just going to require it. So we have required this dot icon, required this dot text. Then we can save it. I'm going to replace these values over here. So we have widget dot icon, and finally we have widget dot text. Then in the search section, we need to pass in our stuff. So we have icon, and the icon over here is icons dot auto awesome outlined. Then we have label, which is focus, or text that is focus. Then we can copy paste these two properties over here as well. So the first icon is icons dot add circle outlined, and the text is going to be attach. Okay. Then we can come back over here, and yeah, this is decent. Now we need to change things from within. So first of all, we are going to wrap this entire container with a padding widget. So we have padding of edge insets dot symmetric, where we are going to pass in the horizontal value as 8 and the vertical value as 4. Then we can save it, come back over here, looks good. Next, we need to leave some space between these two things, the icon and the text. So we can just simply specify constant size box of width 8, and yeah, that would do the trick. Now we need to implement the hover logic. Basically, when I come on top of this, we hover over it, it highlights the particular button thing. So here I can specify the property of boolean is hover. And initially this is going to be set to false. Then I'm going to have a widget wrapped to this container, which is mouse region. In this mouse region, we are going to have two functions, on enter, on exit. So when the user enters, we're going to do one thing. We're going to set state of is hovered to true. And when the user exits, we're going to do the opposite. So basically the user is not hovering anymore, so it is set to false. Now I need to take this his hovered value and change the color based on it. So if it is hovering, then what I want to do is appcolors.pro button. Otherwise, we have colors.transparent. And now if I hover on top of this, as you can see, we are having that nice effect. So it makes it seem as if we are clicking on it, and that's a good thing. Now I can go back to the search section and change this container that we have a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is wrap this text field with the padding widget. So I'm going to wrap it with padding, and we are going to have edgeinsets.all 16 over here, and there's more spacing all around the text field. I'm going to do the same thing for this row as well. I'm going to wrap it with a padding widget, and we have constant edgeinsets.all 10. And there we go. Now I'm going to wrap this entire container that includes this text field and these two buttons with a decoration, and I'm going to pass in a border radius that will curve the entire thing. So we have the container with width 700. Here I'm going to specify the border radius, and the border radius is going to be border radius.circular 8. Then we're going to save it, and yeah, stuff looks good. Now I need to specify a border. So I can specify border of border.all, and here specify the color, which is appcolors.searchbar border. Then if I save it over here, we have a nice border that looks exactly like this. Now I just want to increase its thickness because it doesn't look as thick. So I'm just going to have a width of 1.5, and yeah, that's great. The last thing I want to do is decrease the padding around this text field, or decrease the padding within this text field. So I can go to the text field, and here I can specify two things. Is dense true, so it will take lesser space, and then I can specify content padding, which is edgeinsets.0. So edgeinsets.0, and yep, everything compresses, and this looks exactly like we have over here. Now the last thing we want to do is center these two things. Now to center it, what we can do is wrap this column with an expanded widget. So this entire column that we have, this will take the entire width on the screen, right? When we use this expanded widget within a column, it takes the entire height. When we use it within a row, it will take the entire width. And now I can save it, and as you can see, everything is centered. So with this, everything looks just like this. Now the last thing we need is a footer. And footer is nothing but a container which has a row with all of the elements present inside of it. So it's just going to be a container that has a padding, which is going to be edgeinsets.symmetric, vertical 16. Then we have a child, and in this child we are going to have a row. But the problem with row is that when we decrease the size of this page, the row will not put all of the elements on the next line. So basically, if I have a row, each of the elements are alongside each other, right? So if the width decreases by a lot, none of the elements would go to the next line. I want them to go to the next line. So that's why we are not going to use row. We are going to use wrap. And in this wrap, we're going to have children, and the first child is just going to be a simple text that has some padding from the left and the right side. So we are just going to have padding where we have edgeinsets.symmetric, and from the horizontal side we have 12. Then we have a child where we have a text, and this text is, let's say, Pro. Let's just see what it is. Pro Enterprise Store Block Careers and English. So that's it. Then I can also specify the style. Let's just specify it right now. We have text style of font size 14. And yeah, that's good enough. If I come back over here, we see Pro. I also want the color to change. So we have color to be appcolors.footer gray. Now I can take this padding and paste it again. This time we have enterprise. Then again, we can go ahead and paste it. This time we have store. Then again, we can paste it. This time we have blog. After that, we can paste it and we have careers. And after that, we have English. And in the bracket again, English. That's it. So yeah, this is how the footer would look like. Looks great. Now the benefit of this is that if I decrease the screen width, everything goes to a new line. That's great, right? But now whenever the option goes to a new line, what I want to do is center it. So in the wrap that we have, we can specify alignment of wrap alignment dot center. And with this, it will be centered. That's great. So yeah, everything works now. Now the final thing that I want to do for this UI is change this cursor color. I don't want this to be purplish. So I can go to the main.dart file and here specify the color scheme. So it's going to be color scheme dot from seed, and the seed color is just going to be app colors dot submit button. And if I do that and come over here, as you can see, the cursor color is now kind of blue. And when I select a particular part of text, it's again blue. That's great. So yeah, we're done with the UI. Now the next thing we want to get started with is the backend. And our backend is going to be FastAPI. So let's go ahead and set up a FastAPI environment. So to get started with the backend side of things, what we're going to do is go to the File Explorer, and in the root of our Flutter project itself, we're going to create a new folder. Let's call this server. And now I'm going to open up my terminal, and in this terminal cd into this server folder. Now, the first thing I want to do in this server folder is create a virtual environment. What is a virtual environment? It is a self-contained directory that will isolate a specific project's Python dependencies, allowing us to manage different versions of packages for each project without any conflicts. So for example, if I have this server folder project, and let's say in the future I create a ChatGPT clone, and that is also in Python, and let's say both of them use a similar dependency. So let's say I'm using FastAPI version 5.0.2 in this server folder, and later on we use FastAPI version 6 or version 7. So there can be a case of breaking change between FastAPI version 5 and FastAPI version 6 or 7. And if I manually install a Python dependency just using pip install without using a virtual environment, what will happen is a package will be globally installed on the system. It will not be project specific. So if I install version 5 for this project and later on install version 7, there will only be version 7 on our system. And that will cause conflicts for both of these projects, because in the Perplexity clone project, I want version 5. With version 7, it will break. So that's why we create a virtual environment. It is kind of like an independent box that contains all the dependencies of a particular project. So to create a virtual environment, we can simply do python 3-m venv. So python 3-m venv says that we want to create a virtual environment, and this is the name of the folder, venv. If you want to name it something else, you can definitely do that. So I'm going to hit enter, open up the server folder, and we have venv folder over here. Now what I want to do is activate this virtual environment. And to activate this virtual environment, we need to go to this venv folder, bin, and here we have the activate command that we'll run. So to run this, we need to do source.venv/bin/activate, and a virtual environment is activated. As you can see, this prefix tells us that a virtual environment is activated. Now in the server folder, I'm going to go ahead and create a main.py file, and in this main.py file, I'm going to just print hello world, just to see if my Python file and the entire setup is working correctly. And then I can just run python 3 main.py and we see hello world printed out. That's great. Now I want to install FastAPI in this virtual environment so that I can start creating my API route. So here I'm just going to do FastAPI dev main.py, and actually we don't have to run this command first. Let's just install the FastAPI package in this project. So we have pip install FastAPI, and FastAPI is installed. After FastAPI is installed, we need to instantiate FastAPI in this project. So to instantiate FastAPI, we can do app is equal to FastAPI. It's important to name this app, as we'll see later on, because behind the scenes, FastAPI goes and searches for this app variable that is instantiated, because it will do multiple tasks with it. So we have named it FastAPI, and now we need to import this FastAPI class. We've seen this in Flutter as well. Whenever we want to use a module or a class that is given by some external package, we need to import it. So we can just add from FastAPI import FastAPI, and now I can create a simple get route. So to create a get route, we need to do @app.get, and I'll just put a / as the path name. So if I go on localhost 8000 /, the API route will be called, and then I need to create a function. Let's just call this hello world function, and it's just going to return hello world. So whatever we return over here, that is going to be the return value for when the user reaches this /route. So I'm going to save it, and now I'm going to run the command FastAPI dev main.py. FastAPI dev means that FastAPI will start in the development mode, and main.py just says that we want to run this file. And then I can hit enter, and it says to use the FastAPI command, please install FastAPI standard. So I'm just going to copy this line, paste it in the terminal, and hit enter. After that's done, I can again run the command FastAPI dev main.py, and our server is now launched. If we see the logs over here, we see starting development server. It is searching for some files, and after that, it goes to the main.py file. Over here, it is importing the FastAPI app object from the module with the following code: from main import app. So it's going to our main.py file and trying to search for this app variable. So if it didn't have that app variable, we would get an error. Let's say it was named fast or something like that. It would give us an error because it only specifically searches for app. So if you named it anything else and you want to keep that name, what you can do is FastAPI dev main.py : and then pass in the name of your variable. Let's say it was called fast, and then it would work fine. But for our use case, app is still fine. And over here also you'll get this hint using import string main : app, and then it says server started at this, documentation at this. So yeah, everything looks good over here. Now if we want to test out a server, what we can do is go to the Safari or any browser you want, and here specify localhost 8000 and hit enter. Here you'll see hello world written out. That's great. Now if I want to see the documentation of this entire API, I can do localhost 8000/docs, and we see this open API documentation for all the routes. And if I click on try it out over here, execute, it has hello world returned. Another type of documentation you can access in FastAPI is localhost 8000/redoc. And once you do that, this is the thing you get. But I kind of prefer localhost 8000/docs, not redoc. So yeah, now that this / is working, you can also see we have a list of logs over here, whatever endpoints were hit and what was successful, what was not successful. So that's cool too. Now we want to get started with our actual application. So I'm going to remove this app.get / and replace it with our actual route. Our actual route is about chatting, right? We'll be able to send a query to this API and it will give us a response. Now that response is going to contain all the sources that Perplexity searches for and the final response. But first we'll require some data from the user, right? Because first we need to know the query that the user is searching. What are they searching? Maybe they're searching who is Revan. So we need to get that particular query from the front end. And to do that, we cannot use a GET request. We'll need a POST request. And to create a POST request, we have to do @app.post. And the path over here is going to be /chat. Okay. Now we can just create a function. Let's call this search or chat endpoint. And then we need to ask for the body of the request. Now, how do we take the body of the request? You might think that we can just add a variable over here and that is the body of the request. So whenever the user passes in the body of the request, we'll get it from this query. But that's not the case. We cannot take it through the parameter because this query stands for the query string. By query string, I mean if the user goes to the endpoint /chat and then puts a question mark and says query is equal to who %20 stands for a space is %20 Revan, we'll get this particular string from the query. So that's not how you get the body of the request. To get the body of the request, we'll have to create a pydantic model that will allow us to get the body. What do I mean by that? Let's go to a file explorer and minimize this VENV folder. In the server folder, we're going to create a new folder. Let's call this pydantic_models. And in this pydantic model, we're going to have only one model, and that's going to be the body of the request. So we can just call this chat body.py. Then we're going to create a class called chat body, and this has to extend a particular class, and that class is base model. and we need to take that base model from Pydantic. Pydantic will allow us to specify the type and will automatically tell the FastAPI endpoint that what we are requesting for is the body of the request, not anything else. So I'm going to put a colon here, and let's say we are asking for the query, right? It is going to be of the type string. So that's how you create it. So what we have done is pretty simple, created a class of chat body which extends base model. As soon as we extend base model, we are saying that this is a Pydantic model. If it's a Pydantic model and this chat body is used anywhere, it's going to be the body of the request. And what we require from the body is query, and it's going to be of the type string. So if you pass an integer, it will convert it into a string. If you pass in any other type, it will try to convert it into a string, otherwise it will throw an error. So it performs the type validation for us. So we are going to go to the main.py file and say that this query is going to be body and it's going to be of the type of chat body. Now we need to import this chat body from this chatbody.py file. So I'm going to press command full stop again, and we have this line. From server.pydanticmodels.chatbody import chatbody. So what we have done is gone to the server folder. In the Pydantic models folder, we have chatbody.py. We went over there and imported this chatbody class. Okay. After that, I just want to do a simple thing. I want to go ahead and print the body.query just to ensure I have everything. And I'm also going to return body.query. So there we go. Now I'm going to save this. And if I open up my terminal, you'll see no module named server. So we are getting this error because we are in the server folder. So why are we trying to do server.pydanticmodels.chatbody? Instead, we just need to do pydanticmodels.chatbody. So I'm going to remove this line from server. So once we do that, save the file. The server automatically restarts. That's a good thing. And if I go to the localhost 8000 website, and let's say I just go to the docs, rerun it, we have /chat post request over here. And it's named as chat endpoint. So it's basically converting this chat endpoint function into a normal description. That's good. Now I'm going to expand this request, try it out, pass in the query. We need to pass in the request body, and it's going to be who is Rivan. We'll try to get this answer by the end of this tutorial. We can click on execute and we get a response of who is Rivan because that is the body.query. And if I open up my terminal, we also get who is Rivan over here because we have printed body.query. Awesome. So stuff works. Now what we need to do is get started with the actual logic of our application. So how exactly is our Perplexity clone going to work? So I'm going to divide this into 3 steps. The first step is going to be to search the web and find appropriate sources. So based on the body.query, we are going to search the web and find the appropriate sources. The second step is going to be sort the sources. So based on what's the most relevant versus what's the least relevant, we're going to sort it. And the third step is going to be to generate the response using large language model, or in our case, Gemini. So for each of these tasks, we are going to create a separate class, and we're going to do that in the server folder. So in the server folder, we're going to create a new folder called services. And in this, we're going to have 3 services. Let's create the first one, which is the search service. So here we're going to create search_service.py. And this is going to be a simple search service class. So I'm just going to create that. And here we're going to have one function that is public, which is the web search function. So we're going to have def web_search self, and we're going to get the query from the parameter of this function, and it's going to be of the type string. And this function is basically going to search the web and return all the search results it gets. So I can take this search service and instantiate it in main.py. So we have search_service, which is equal to search service like this. And I'm going to import it. And again, we have to remove this server dot whatever. The reason this server dot services is being done by VS Code is because we are in the root Flutter folder, right? So it's taking the perspective of the root Flutter folder and doing server dot services.search service. If we go into the server folder and open our Visual Studio Code in that particular folder, not in this Perplexity clone folder, we'll get proper imports. But I'm too lazy to do that, so let's move forward. Now what I want to do is take this search service and search the web to find the appropriate sources. So I'm going to remove this comment and call the web search function on it. Now let's go to the search service and understand how we are going to search the web based on our query. Now there are two approaches you can take here. The first approach is to use the Gemini API over here to search the web. What do I mean by that? Well, we can use Gemini to create a list of queries from the main query. So example, if we have who is Rivan, that's a pretty easy question to answer by just going on Google and searching for who is Rivan. But let's say we had a more complex query where you're basically describing your entire life situation. It would be difficult to search this entire query on Google. So I can't just take this query and put it on Google, take the appropriate responses, and that is our result. No, I cannot do it because Google is not designed for that, at least as of now. So what I can do is use the Gemini API to break down this query into, let's say, 4 queries. So we'll tell Gemini that, hey, this is the query. Take this query and give me 4 queries I can use to search Google to get this result. So if it was a more complex query, it would give me the 4 queries which I could use to search on Google. That's one way you can go about doing this thing. The other way is to use a service that is designed for this task. And what I found is Teveli is pretty good at this. So by using Teveli, we can just take the query, put it to Teveli, and it will give us all the search results, and then we can move forward. So we're going to use this Teveli API, and to use it first we need to sign up. So I'm going to go ahead, click on sign up. And once I've done the sign up process, I'll meet you. And once you log in, this is the page you will see, and automatically an API key will be created for you. As you can see, there's an API limit of 1000 requests, and you can do that completely for free. After that, you can increase your limits. So by paying $30 per month, you can do 4000 API calls, and the plan keeps growing. So whatever you want to take, you can do that. I'm just going to stay on the free plan. I'm going to copy this API key, and then we can use this API key whenever we want to call the Teveli API. But I'm going to go one step forward and secure this API key. So I'm going to use .env to secure our data. So what I'm going to do is open up the file explorer, and in the server folder, I'm going to create a config.py file. In this config.py file, I'm going to first load up .env, and for that, I'll have to install .env. So I'm going to stop my server for now, pip3 install python-.env, and then hit enter. And as you can see, requirement already satisfied, python.env is already added. So now I can do load_.env and call this function, and now we need to import this function from .env. So we can do from .env import load_.env, and there we go. After that, we can go ahead and create a class called settings, which will import base settings, and this base settings is going to come from Pydantic. So we are going to do from Pydantic_settings import base settings. And we have a typo, so let's do Pydantic_settings import base settings. That's good. And now we're going to specify the API key name over here. So we're going to have Teveli_API_key, which is of the type of string. With this, I think Pydantic and our application will be able to figure out the Teveli API key if it's present, and if it's not present, we'll just give it a default value of an empty string. Now we need to go ahead and create a .env file. So in our server folder, we're going to have .env, and then in the config, I'm going to take this Teveli API key, pass it in the .env, which is equal to, then I'm going to copy this API key from our dashboard and paste it over here. Now don't copy this API key because I'm going to delete this API key. Use your own API key. Now just to test things out, I'm going to go to the search service and instantiate the settings class. So we are going to have settings is equal to settings, and let's import it from config import settings. And now I can just do print settings dot Teveli API key. So I'm going to open up the terminal, run FastAPI dev main.py, hit enter, and we have an error. no module named pydantic settings, so we need to import this particular package. Pydantic underscore settings module doesn't come from the pydantic package. We need to separately install it. So we have pip install pydantic underscore settings. Then I can hit enter and there we go. Now I can run this again. Everything seems to be working. So I can go to the web browser and run this command again. Who is Rivan? Let's execute that and we get an internal server error. Web search was missing one required positional argument. So let's pass that argument in as well. So we'll have body.query passed over here. And now let's try it again. So we'll execute this code and we get who is Rivan. And if we go and look at the terminal, we get our API key printed out. So that means all the loading of .env was done successfully. Now just to explain this part of the code, what we have done is loaded the .env file using the python.env package. And then this class settings extended the base settings that comes from pydantic settings. So when we extend our settings class with the base settings, pydantic will automatically go and pull values from the environment variable based on this particular name. So since I've mentioned Teveli API key over here, it will go and start fetching the Teveli API key from the .env file it sees or from the environment variable you've passed in anywhere else in your machine. So this is a pretty convenient way to pull and store the API keys. And with this, all the .env stuff is done. Now, one thing I'll say is if you're pushing your repository to GitHub, ensure that you git ignore this .env file, because if you don't, there is actually no point of doing all of these things, because the purpose of .env is to securely store your API key so that no one else uses it. So just ensure that you have a git ignore. Now we can go to the search service and start doing our thing. So the first thing I want to do is perform a web search using this Teveli API. Now, how do I access this Teveli API? So if you go to their documentation, you'll notice a bunch of things written over here using which you can get started. So there are two ways to go about doing this. The first one is to use the Teveli Python package, or you can manually go to their API endpoint and hit that. So there's this api.teveli.com/search that you can use to hit their endpoint and get the search results, or you can just use this package. We're going to use this package, so let's copy that, open up our project, close the server for now, and run this command pip install Teveli Python. Once that's done, we can refer to the documentation to do more things. The first one is to import this line from Teveli, import Teveli client. So let's copy that and paste it at the top. After that, we need to create this Teveli client passing in our API key. So I can again copy that and paste it over here. Now I need to pass in the API key, which is equal to settings.teveli API key. And now I can take this Teveli client to search whatever I want to search. So I can again copy this entire thing and paste it over here. Now, just to see what this response is going to be, I'm going to print this response. Then I'm going to save it, open up our terminal, run the FastAPI dev main.py terminal command, and then I can go to this Swagger UI, execute it, and we have a loading time. That's good because it was searching the web and finding a response. And now if I open up the terminal, there we go. The query was who is Leo Messi, because that's what we had searched. Well, we didn't want to search that, but that's fine. We can pass in a query now instead of who is Leo Messi. But anyways, this is our response. So it gives us a query, follow-up questions, answer, images, and results. And results is the big chunk of what we want. Result is going to specify the title, the URL, the content of all the things it has searched. So now I'm just going to do response.get results. And if results property is not mentioned in this response, I can just pass in an empty list. Now let's try to see what happens. So if I restart the entire thing, execute it, let's see what we get. I'm going to open up my terminal again and it says all of these things. Now I can modify this query a little bit in our request so that we get the actual data. So I'm going to do Rivan Ranawat and then execute it. And let's see if that works properly. And there we go. So this is the data that we get. And yeah, this looks good enough. But here's the problem. What if the number of sources that are present over here are too high or too less? Is there a way that I can specify that these are the number of sources I want? And yes, we can do that. We can specify max results over here, which is equal to, let's say, 10. So it will go and search for 10 sources every single time. Not more than that, not less than that. And this will give us a consistent way of going about things. Now if I execute the command, we'll always get 10 sources. Now the next thing I want to do is ensure that I don't get a certain section of the URL over here. So heavily just goes and searches for things that are named Rivandranawat, and it only gives me those particular kinds of things. No, what I want to do is get the entire content of that web page so that I get more context which I can put into Gemini and generate a response. So Tavili's job was just to give me the URL, and now I can use that URL to go down further into the rabbit hole and get more data. And to get more data and scrape the website, we can use this package, Treffilateora. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce this, so if you know the right pronunciation, let me know. But yeah, this is the package we'll be using. So I'm going to stop the execution of the server now and install this package, pip install Treffilateora, then hit enter. After that's done, I'm going to rerun the server, and now I'm going to use this module. So I'm going to go to the top and import this Treffilateora package. And now whatever results we get from here, I want to store this in a variable. Let's call this search underscore results. And that is equal to response.get results. Now I want to loop through every result in this search result and use the Treffilateora package to fetch the URL to extract the main content. So I can do Treffilateora dot fetch underscore URL, and then I'll pass in the URL. And first of all, I want it to loop in, so I'll do for result in search results. Then I'll do Treffilateora dot fetch URL and take this result and pass in the URL that's present, right? If we go at the top, for every result mentioned, there is a URL. So I just want to access that. Now, if you want to be more safe, you can do result.get URL and things should work fine. So when we call the fetch URL method, what we are doing is downloading the main content. So I'll do downloaded is equal to this. And now I want to extract the content from this downloaded content. So to do that, we can again use Treffilateora.extract. Then I'll pass in the downloaded variable to it. So it will extract the main content. And another property I'm going to pass in here is include underscore comments is equal to false. So it will not include the HTML comments that it usually includes. And now I can save this in the content variable. And let's go ahead and print this content. So I'm going to save it. And actually, let's just go ahead and create a variable called results. So these are the results of our web search. And then I'm going to do results.append content. And from this function, we are going to return this results because that's the job of this web search function, right? It's going to search the entire web, and whatever it does, it will return to us a list that contains all the results with all the data. And we're not passing in all the data if you notice. We're just passing in the content. Let's pass in more data. For example, we would need the title of the website that we searched. That would give us additional context, right? Then we also need this content. We also need the URL. So we are going to append an entire map or a dictionary over here where I pass in the title, which is going to be result.get title. And if it's not present, it's just going to be an empty string. After that, we are going to pass in the URL, which is result.get URL again. And after that, we are going to have the content, which is just content like that. And then at the end, we are returning the results. That's good. Now, the reason we are returning URL and title is because first, they'll give additional context to Gemini. But also, when we display stuff on our front end, we are going to list out all the sources, right? In that, we'll require the title of the source and the URL so that the user can click and search for themselves if they want. So that's the benefit. And now, since we've returned the results from here, I'm going to go to the main.py and store whatever this function gives us in a variable called search results and then print the search results. Now I'm going to open up my terminal go to FastAPI Swagger UI, execute the command, and get all of this data. So all the search results part of our application is now done. The next thing is to sort the sources. Now, how do we want to sort the sources? Well, I want to do kind of a similarity search. What I mean by similarity search is just check that the query that the user has passed in through body.query and the search results, how much similarity do they have? So if the similarity is high, then I want that search result to be higher up because I want to parse this as soon as possible. And if it's a lower similarity score, it can go more below. So we have to do the similarity search, and for that, again, I'm going to create a new service. Let's call this sort source service.py. I'm not good with names. So we have class sort source service. And here we are just going to have a main function. Let's call this sort the sources. Okay. And it's going to require two things over here. The first one is the query, which is of the type of string. And the second thing is going to be the search results, right? Because based on the search results, you're going to do our similarity search. So we can have search results, and it's going to be of the type of list, which is a dictionary. So make sure you import both of them. From typing, we are importing list, and then it's a dictionary. So that's good. And now we need to decide how we are going to do this. So there are multiple types of similarity searches that we can use. The one we are going to focus on is called cross similarity search. Now to understand cross similarity search, first we need to understand what embedding and vectorization mean. So what is embedding? And we can also call this vectorization. So let's say we have a query, and the query is what is the score of India versus Australia. Now the process of converting this query into a higher dimensional matrix is known as embedding. What is a higher dimensional matrix? Well, let's say it is just a list that contains of various numbers. All right. So these are the various that would represent this particular text in a higher dimensional space. So it can be 0.5, 1, 0.2, 0.3, whatever. Okay, -1, whatever. To visualize this better, what we can do is, let's say we have a 3D space, right? If we had to represent a 3D space, we would just have a matrix that would have 3 elements in that. So from the X direction, we have 1, from the Y direction, we have -1, and from the Z direction, we have 0.5. So that means if this is the X, Y, and Z axis, from the X, we have 1, from the Y, we have -1, and from the Z, we have 0.5. So this is where our vector exists. So similar to this, if we had, let's say, 300 dimensions or 1200 dimensions or 700 dimensions, we would also have that in some form of graph, right? Now, obviously, I can't draw it because we can only think in 3 dimensions. We cannot think beyond that. But what we are doing is converting this query into a higher dimensional, let's say 300 dimension list. And this 300 dimension list just consists of values which are numbers stored in this list. Now, since we are limited by what we can imagine, let's say we are just in a 3D figure. If we try to represent this, what is the score of India versus Australia in a 3-dimensional matrix, maybe this looks like this. And our vector is over here. I'm also going to zoom in a little bit over here just so that we have a clearer understanding. Let's say our vector is present over here. This is our query vector. So that's embedding. Now we are going to embed another thing, which is the result content. What is the result content? So if we go back to our search service, this content that we had, this is the content that we are going to vectorize. So the big string is vectorized, and maybe in a 3-dimensional format, it looks something like this. Now, how do I examine the similarity between this query and this result content? To do that, I can simply take this arrow and add it to the tail of this query embedding. That's totally allowed. And then I can examine the angle between these two things. So that's called, let's say, theta. And if we want to examine how much similarity these two things have, that is, what is the angle between these two things, we've been given a nice formula in math. and that is the dot product. So let's say we have a dot product of q dot r. Q dot r is given by q, the magnitude of q, the magnitude of r, cos theta. And if we rearrange the equation, we have cos theta is equal to q dot r divided by the magnitude of q multiplied by the magnitude of r. And that is the formula that we'll be using to calculate the similarity between these two things, the query and the result. So to recap what we understood over here, we convert the query into a higher dimensional matrix. We are going to use an embedding model for that. There are various embedding models out there. For example, OpenAI, the creator of ChatGPT, have their own embedding models. Even Google has one. Nvidia has one, Meta has one, all of them have their own, but we'll not be using any of them because they are paid. We want to do it for free. So we can use the open source version, and that is the sentence transformers version. So we'll be using an embedding model given by sentence transformers, and they have various embedding models. So if you want to find out their embedding models, you can do sentence transformers, embedding models, and you'll find a list over here. As you can see, these are all the ones. We are going to be using this one, all mini LM L6 V2. The description is given over here and the dimensions is also given 384. Now, one thing I'd like to clarify is that when we convert the query into a higher dimensional matrix, it doesn't mean that a higher dimensional model is always better. That's not how it works, because let's say in our version we have 380. And we have 1200. Yeah, both of those would work well. But let's say if we have something like a 10,000 dimensional matrix, 10,000 dimensional model, that will not necessarily outperform these two models. That's because in a higher dimensional space, the vectors will be far apart. They'll be away from each other, and even if they are very similar, they will be considered very different because they are very away from each other. Now, I know it's tough to imagine, so you can just take my word for it. A higher dimensional model will not mean that you have a better performance. That's not how it works. But yeah, there are various other versions you can use, like all MPNet base 2, which has a dimension size of 768. But there's obviously trade-offs with everything. The higher dimension size it is, the speed of converting from a text data to a higher dimensional matrix will take more time as compared to a lower model. For example, in our version, we only have 384 dimensions. So the speed is 14,200. But since this is 768, it takes more time. The speed is 2800 over here. The model size is 80 megabytes. And for this one, it is 420 megabytes. So there's trade-offs with everything. You can decide which one you like better. But yeah, we're going to be using this one, all mini LM L6 V2. But yeah, coming back to our process, we convert this query into a higher dimensional matrix using an embedding model, which is the sentence transformer one we were going to be using. And the same goes for the result content as well. The result content will also be converted into a higher dimensional matrix. Let me clear off some space so that we have a better understanding of what we are going to do. Let's say the result content looks like this: 0.2, 0.7, 0.3, and so on. After both of them have been converted into their respective matrices, what we are going to do is use this formula. Cos theta is equal to q dot r divided by the magnitude of q multiplied by the magnitude of r. Now dot product is basically, if we do q dot r, it is equal to 0.5 multiplied by 0.2. So that is, let's say, 0.1 plus, and then we multiply 1 with 0.7, then we multiply 0.2 with 0.3, and so on. So it's just 0.5 into 0.2, which is 0.1, plus 1 into 0.7, which is 0.7, plus 0.2 into 0.3, which is, let's say, 0.6, and that's not right, it's 0.06. So yeah, you get the point. This is how dot product is calculated, and the magnitude of q and r can be found out this way. So I'll just remove this so that we get more space. The magnitude of q is just the square root of 0.5 the whole square plus 1 the whole square plus 0.2 the whole square, and so on. So this is how you would calculate the magnitude of Q. And if you want to calculate the magnitude of R, similar thing, square root of 0.2 the whole square plus 0.7 the whole square plus 0.3 the whole square, and so on. So with this, we would get the value of cos theta. Now the next and the final question you might have is that, is a higher value good or a lower value good? So that means, is one representing that the query and the result are similar, or does 0 represent that the query and result are similar? Well, we can think about it. If we get cos theta equal to 1, what does that mean? That means theta is equal to cos inverse of 1. And what is cos inverse of 1? It is just 0. If theta is equal to 0, what does it mean? If theta is equal to 0, that means two vectors align on top of each other. And if they align on top of each other, that means they are the most similar. And let's say if cos theta is equal to 0. If cos theta is equal to 0, that means theta is equal to 90 degrees. And that means the vectors are perpendicular to each other. So to answer the question, if we get a value of 1, that's great. That means they're the most similar thing in the world. And if we get values lower than that, that means they're not similar to each other. So let's go to the code and code it up. So we have the sort sources service here. Now the first thing I want to do is embed the query and the search result. And to do that, first I need to install the sentence transformers package. So we're going to do pip install sentence_transformers and then hit enter. After that's done, we're going to create an init function, and in this init function, we're going to instantiate the embedding model. So we have self.embedding model equal to sentence transformer. And as we said, there are multiple sentence transformer models you can use, but what we are going to use is all mini lm L6 v2. And now we also need to import sentence transformer. So we have from sentence transformers import sentence transformer. Now I want to go ahead and embed the query. So we have self.embeddingModel.encode and we'll pass in the query. And this is going to be the query underscore embedding like this. Now just to show it to you, I'm also going to go ahead and print the query embedding so that we get a more realistic perspective of how the values are going to look like. Now I can restart my localhost 8000 and actually I need to start my server. So we have FastAPI dev main.py. Now I can restart localhost. I'll try it out. Now the query is, what is the score of India versus Australia? And one thing I forgot to do is, if I go to the main.py file, I forgot to add the sort source service over here. So I'm going to create a variable sort source service, which is equal to sort source service. Then I'm going to import it and I'm going to remove this from server dot anything. Now I can take the sort source service and do dot sort sources. Then we need to pass in the query, which is body.query, and the search results, which is just search results. I can also remove this comment, not needed anymore. And we can probably also remove the search results. That's good. Now I can go to the Swagger UI documentation, execute, open up my terminal, and let's wait for the response to arrive. And here we have our response. These are the values. And if you just do length of query embedding over here, you'll see that the value is 384. So I'm going to save it and we can execute it again to see that value. And yep, we do get 384. So it is a simple matrix with 384 values. It is a simple list with 384 values. That's how you can understand it. Now we're going to do the same thing for all of the result content. So we're going to loop over the search results and embed each of these values as well. So I'm going to do for result in search results. Then I can do result embedding, which is equal to self.embeddingModel.encode, and then I'll pass in the result at content, because if we go back to our search service, this is how our dictionary was laid out. Result at content. And now I can print the result embedding if I want, but I am sure it's going to work fine because the query embedding worked fine. So I can simply go ahead and calculate the similarity based on our formula. And that was calculating the dot product. Now, how do we calculate the dot product? To calculate the dot product, we can install a package called NumPy. So NumPy will give us access to various functions or various mathematical functions that will help us implement the formula quickly. So after installing it, just start the server again, and then we can do similarity is equal to np, and we need to import NumPy. So we'll do import NumPy as np. So we can access the NumPy package using np dot. So we calculate the dot product, and what are we calculating it between? The query embedding and the result embedding. And if we go back to our formula, here was our formula. Cos theta is equal to q dot r. So we have calculated that q dot r, and then we need to divide it by the magnitude of q multiplied by the magnitude of r. And to calculate the magnitude, you can do np dot lineage dot norm. So norm is just calculating the magnitude if we pass in a vector, and it calculates the Euclidean norm if you're familiar with it. Otherwise, we can just pass in the query embedding over here, and then we can multiply it with the same thing. So we'll have np.lineage.norm, but instead of passing in query embedding, we'll pass in the result embedding. And with this, we have implemented the formula. If we go back again, just to revise, we have q.r, which is this thing, divided by the magnitude of the query multiplied by the magnitude of the result. So that would give us a similarity. And we know that a higher similarity, a higher value over here is good. So we can just go ahead and print the similarity over here to see how stuff looks. Let's go ahead and test it out. What is the score of India versus Australia? We're going to execute it. I'm going to open the terminal and wait for the response. So these are the responses I get. 0.59, 0.63, 0.43, 0.66, 0.6. So that means all of the sources were quite good. If I want, I can store this similarity within this result document, because this result will also be useful when we try to generate the response using LLM. So I can simply do response at relevance score or similarity, whatever you want to call it. Let's just go with something that makes us look cool, and then I can set it equal to similarity. Also, another thing I would like to do here is filter the documents. So that means if a particular document does not match a particular relevance score, we'll just not include it in our filtered list. So what I can do is create a variable called relevant docs, which is equal to an empty list. And then I can put an if condition. If the similarity score is, let's say, greater than 0.3 or 0.4, whatever you want. If that score is greater than 0.3, because remember, the similarity is going to be below 1. It's never going to be above 1. Just think about it. How can cos theta be above 1? So if similarity is greater than 0.3, if you want to raise your bar, maybe 0.5 is your bar. That is your threshold. So you can put that, but I'm fine with 0.3. If it's greater than 0.3, then I'm just going to do relevant docs dot append, and I'm going to append the result document over here. So with this, I've also done some filtering, and after that, I want to sort the sources. As of now, they're not sorted, they're in any order. Now I want to sort it, so I'm just going to do sorted, pass in the relevant docs, and on basis of what do I want to sort these documents? I don't want them to be sorted based on the alphabetical character. I want them to be sorted based on their relevance score, this particular similarity score. So we can do key is equal to lambda, which is an anonymous function which will tell the sorted function that we want to sort based on a particular thing, a particular value, and that is x at relevance scope. And then we can return these documents. Also, if we just do this much, we will have an ascending order. That means the lowest similarity score will be the top of the list, and we don't want that. The 0th index should be the highest similarity score. So I can also do reverse is equal to true. And with this, our sources should be sorted. So I can ask for the sorted results over here. Sorted results is equal to this particular thing. And then we can print the sorted results. Then I can execute the command, open up my terminal and wait for the response. And there we go. This is all of our data. Well, that's a lot of data. So I'll just stress that my code works. And with this, we are done with the most difficult part of this application. So if you've understood this, everything else from now on is going to be very simple. So the last thing is to generate the response using an LLM. And for that, we can create a new service called llm_service.py. Then I can create a class LLM service, or if you want to call this Gemini service, that's good too. And here we're going to have a function called generate response. That generate response is going to take a query of string, and it's also going to take the search results. And then it's going to be a list of dictionary, and we need to do our stuff over here. So for our LLM, we know we'll be using Gemini. And for that, we need to get the Gemini API key, and we also need to get the Gemini package in our system so that we can start using it. So let's do that. So first, let's open up our terminal and install the particular package. So the package we want is pip install Google Generative AI. So this is the package. This will allow us to use Gemini. Now I'm going to close the terminal, and here we're going to again create our init method so that we can instantiate our model. So we are going to have self.model equal to generative AI, and we're going to import that generative AI at the top. So we'll have import google.generative AI as gen AI, and then we can just do gen AI dot generative model and pass in the model name. So there are a bunch of models you can use, but if you want to know where to get the latest one, you can just go to aistudio.google.com. And when you get to a screen like this, there are a bunch of models you can choose from, like Gemini 1.5 series, the ones that are in preview, Gemma, which is like something you can run on your local machine. So what we are going to choose is the preview version, the Gemini 2.0 Flash experimental version. If you want to use the non-experimental version, you can go ahead and use either of them. I'm going to use this. And if you click on get code, you'll notice it gives us all the code in Python. If you want to change the language, we can do that, right? But again, we are using Python. And what we want to do is get an API key. So to get an API key, you can click on this blue button, get API key. And then you can click on create API key. Now we need to link this with a project in Google Cloud. So we need to go and search for GCP. So once we go to cloud.google.com, we can click on the console, click on this particular icon, click on new project, and let's call this project Perplexity clone. Then we can click on create, and a new project will be created for us. Once the project is created and you've selected it over here, we can search for Gemini, and when we search for Gemini, we get the Gemini API. We can click on that, and then we can click on enable. Now once that's done, we can come back to AI Studio, click on create API key, then we can search for Perplexity clone, the project we created, and then we can click on create API key in existing project. After that's done, I'm going to copy this API key, add it to my .env first of all. So I'm going to say Gemini API key is equal to this thing. And then I can go to my config.py file where I have Gemini _API _key, which is of the type string. And by default, it is just an empty string. Once that's done, we can go to the LLM service, and here we can say that we want to use settings. And first I need to instantiate settings. So I'll have settings is equal to settings, and then I need to import that settings from config. So I'll just do that, and then I can use settings dot Gemini API key. And before that as well, if you just go to the code over here where we create the prompt, first we need to do genai.configure and pass in our API key, genai.configure. And then we can pass in the API key, which is done like this, API key, which is equal to settings.Gemini API key. Now we need to pass in the model name. Click on get code. You'll notice this is what they've done. genai.configure, we pass in the API key. And for the model name, we can just pass in this particular string. So I'll just pass in Gemini 2.0 Flash experiment. I would highly recommend you to use the latest model you see available depends on the date you're watching this video, and see which response gives you a better one. And obviously there are a lot of configurations you can do. I'm going to leave it at the default ones, not gonna experiment with it too much, but if you want, definitely go ahead, do it. Now in the generate response part, I want to first build out my prompt. So my prompt is going to include the context, and the context is this search results. So I want to pile them up really neatly. Now, how am I going to pile them up? So my architecture for my prompt is looking like this. First, I'll have source 1, and source 1 is going to have a URL name over here. So whatever is the source's URL, and then the content for that particular thing. And then I'll have source 2, and the same thing will continue. I'll have URL, and then I'll pass in the content like this. After all of that is done, I'm going to pass in my query. So this is the user's query, and based on this, we will write out a prompt that, hey, please provide a detailed response based on this context only, and don't use your external knowledge until it's absolutely necessary. We'll see how we want that prompt to be completed, but that's the basic prompt that I have in mind. So let's first configure this context text. So let's create a variable context text, which is equal to, and then I'm going to have \n dot join, and then we'll pass in the actual data. So we are going to have a list over here, and that list is going to be formed out of our search results. So I can just do a list comprehension. So I'll have for I comma result in enumerate search results. For each and every result over here, what I want to do is create a string like this, and it's going to be an S string. So I'm going to say source $i plus 1, because I will start from 0. I want to start from 1. So I'll have source 1, then I'll put in a colon, then I'll pass in the URL. And actually, let's not put a colon. Let's just do it like this. So we'll have result at URL colon \n result at content. And actually, we don't need a dollar over here. Dollar is done when we want to do string interpolation in Dart. In Python, we can just do S strings like this. So what I've done over here is just told that for every element that we see in the search result, I want to loop over it and say that this source 1 or source 2 has the URL of this, and on a new line, I'll mention the content, just like I've said before over here, but we don't have a colon. That's the only thing that's different. If you want, you can put this URL in a bracket, and that should be fine as well. Depends on what you want to do. I'm fine with either of them. Now we can go ahead and create an actual prompt. So I'll just do full underscore prompt is equal to, and then I'll use multi-line string so that I can format this nicely. Also, I'm going to remove all of these comments from the top so that it doesn't confuse us anymore. Then I'm going to say context from web search a colon, and then I'm going to pass in the context text, which can be done like this. And obviously this needs to be an F string as well. After that, we are going to provide the query. So I'll pass in the query over here, and this is my query. After that, we're going to say the actual prompt. Please provide a comprehensive, detailed, well-cited, accurate response using the above context. Okay, so what with this line, we're just telling that, hey, we need a detailed, very well cited response. So it continuously mentions the sources that are present over here. Then we can say that it needs to think and reason deeply. And finally, we'll just say ensure it answers the query the user is asking. And maybe we can also say that it cannot use the knowledge it itself has, so the knowledge the LLM itself has, until it is absolutely necessary. So this is my prompt. If you want, you can change your prompt a little bit and see how the responses differ. I'm not very good at this, so take it with a grain of salt. After that, we need to provide this prompt to Gemini. And to do that, we can do self.model.generate content, and then we'll pass in the full prompt, and we can store this in a response. Then we can just return the response.text from here. And I think that's how we use it. So if we see response is stored, and then we can just say response.text. That's good. Now I can go to the main.py file and call this particular service. So I'll have LLM service is equal to LLM service. Then I'm going to import the LLM service from services.llm service. And finally, we can call this function. So we have LLM service dot generate response. We'll pass in the query, which is body.query, and the search results, which is search results. Or actually, let's pass in the sorted results. That's more useful. And then we can return the body.query. And actually, instead of returning that, we can just return the response this gives us. So we'll do response return. Great. Now I'm going to start my server, and after the server is started, I can send in this query. Execute. Let's wait for it. So we have a response with us, and this is the response. Okay, let's break down the scores from the provided sources. It seems we have multiple matches to consider, so let's organize them carefully. The first one is the Ford test day 1 Melbourne. Australia is 31146 at stumps on day 1, and the sources are mentioned correctly. And if we want to verify this information, I can go ahead and check India versus Australia, and it is 311 for 6. So it gives us the right information, and that's great. We also have proper citations, so that's nice too. Now what I want to do is, since we've created an API request, that's good. But we don't really want an API request. What we want is a WebSocket connection. Why? Because we want to get real-time data streaming just like ChatGPT does. So ChatGPT gives us pieces of text continuously while it's making the response, right? We want to do the same thing. And Gemini does offer that to us. We can use the streaming option that Gemini gives us, but to send it over to our client side, we'll be using WebSockets. So this API request can stay as it is, but we are also going to add a WebSocket. So we have a chat WebSocket. So if we want to make an API available to the public user, we can probably expose this route. But for our own use case, we are going to use the WebSocket. And to create a WebSocket in FastAPI, what we can do is @app.websocket, and then we need to pass in the WebSocket path. Let's just call it WS chat. So I've just prefixed the original post request with WS WebSocket. And now I can do definition WebSocket chat endpoint. Then I'll be accepting the WebSocket that comes from the parameter over here. And obviously make sure you import WebSocket from FastAPI. So I've imported it over here. After that, the first thing we want to do is accept the WebSocket connection. And for those who are wondering what WebSocket is, a WebSocket is basically a bi-directional communication. So in standard HTTP request, what we see is that we send a request from the client to the server. So this is the client, this is the server. A request is sent, a post request or a get request, whatever. The server responds back with some data. But in WebSocket, what happens is that if the client sends a request, the server can send real-time updates of the same thing. So it can send multiple pieces of data, and the client can do the same thing. Client can also send a piece of data continuously, and the server can then respond back with streams of data. So this is kind of like the difference between a future and a stream in Dart or Flutter. So coming back to our code base, what we can do is first accept the connection request that, hey, a connection is established, we are good to go. To do that, we need to use await WebSocket.accept. But now await is not given to us. So we need to convert this function into an asynchronous function. So we can do that like this. After that, we're going to do a try and a catch block. So I'll have a try and a catch block. In the catch block, if there's an exception, I can just say unexpected error occurred. And finally, when all of this is over, I can just do WebSocket.close. This try, accept, and finally block is just like what we have in Dart. Nothing really changes. Now in the try block, what I want to do is exactly what I've done over here. So I'm going to take these three things and paste it in over here. But before doing that, what I need to do is accept the data from the client. So in our post request, when we wanted to get the query from the user, we took it from the body of the request, but WebSocket does not have any sort of functionality like that. So we are going to take it from the query. So to do that, we can do data is equal to await WebSocket.receive JSON. So whatever data we get it in a JSON format. And then we just say that the query is equal to data.get, and then we pass in the query. So we get a dictionary, and in that dictionary, we just look for the query argument so that we can get the right value. After that, if we want, we can add additional checks like if not query, then we are going to return an error and stuff like that. So if you want, go ahead, do it. It's the right thing to do. But for our case, I'm going to quickly get over this. I'm going to pass in the query over here, and as soon as we get the search results, I'm going to send this data back to our front end side. So after we get the search results and after we are done sorting it, what I'm going to do is send the data back to the user. So after these two steps, I'm just sending the data back to a user saying that, hey, we have our search done. Here are your results, take it. So we can just do WebSocket.sendJSON, and therefore we need to pass in the dictionary. So the type of this is going to be search_result, and the data is going to be the sorted results that we get. And we can do await WebSocket.sendJSON. Alright. After that, we get a response. Now, how do I stream this data from the WebSocket to my client side? To do that, Gemini will help us a lot. So we can just go to the generate response function, and here, when we have self.model.generateContent, we can add in a condition over here, stream is equal to true. So we're just saying that streaming is allowed. And now what we can do is for chunk in response, because now this becomes a generator. So this generate content function is now returning a bunch of values. So I can just take those chunks and return that. So I'll have return chunk.text, right? No. That's because if we return from the function, we'll never be able to get other parts of the data, right? And we do want to get other parts of data. For example, if we get the first word as the, after we return the, we won't be able to get any other data because we are out of the function. What we need to do instead is yield. So once we do yield, we return the data. So wherever this function is called, let's say over here in the response, I can simply do for chunk in LLM service.generateResponse, and then we pass in the query and also the sorted results. And after that, I can do await WebSocket.sendJSON, and we say this is of the type of content. So we are getting the actual content, and the content or the data is the actual chunk that we got. Okay. Now we can return response from here. Now we can remove the return response from here and we're fine. So how this works is from the generate response function, as soon as we yield, we get the chunk, we send the JSON, and then the control goes back to this function. Then we have another chunk, it yields, and then the control goes back to this function, we send the JSON, and we come back over here. So unlike return, yield allows us to come back to a function. We never go out of the function. And whenever we use yield, this function becomes a generator. So yeah, this is how our WebSocket chat looks like. Now, if we want to test this WebSocket, unfortunately, it's not available on localhost 8000/docs. If you try to see it, it's not available. We cannot test it over here. What we'll have to do is either use Postman, or if you don't want to install Postman, you can search for this pihost.com/WebSocketTester. And then we can test our WebSocket connection. And also send the messages so that we can see the logs over here correctly. But make sure you do it from Chrome or any other browser. Safari, for some reason, does not work over here. And then we can type in ws://. So notice that we have to use ws over here, not wss or even http. ws is WebSocket. Then we can do localhost :8000/ws/chat. Then we can click on connect. And as you can see, connection established. Even over here, WebSocket connection open. After that, we can send in the JSON. So my JSON looks like this query. And then I pass in my actual query. What is my actual query? Who is Elon Musk? That might be an interesting answer. Let's click on send. So we get this query, who is Elon Musk? And then an unexpected error occurs and the connection closes. So that means something's wrong over here. Let's figure that out. To debug, what I'm going to do is go ahead and print the data. And after that, I'm also going to go ahead and print the sorted results. After that's done, I'm just going to print a hi from here to ensure that no problem exists from this WebSocket.send JSON. After that, I'm going to connect again. Connection is established. Now I can click on send. So query who is Elon Musk, we get that correctly. So the data is correct. Now we are waiting for the sorted results to appear and we get an error there. Now I'll go one step ahead to debug this. So I'm going to go print query as well. Now I'm going even more further ahead and printing the search results so that I see if I get this data, and then in the web search, I'm going to add some error handling. So I'm going to do try, then indent all of this and then do except. So if there's an error, I'm going to print that error. And to print this E, what I can do is print except exception as E. So I get print E. And now let's see what happens. So I'm going to click on connect again. Then we can click on send. So we get the query who is Elon Musk. We're waiting for the search results. Let's see if that appears. And we do get the search results. So that's good. So the error occurs over here in sort source service. Let's improve on this as well. So I'm going to do try, take all of this and put it in try block. And then I have except exception as E. Then I'm just going to print E. Let's see what the error over here is. I'm going to open up my terminal, click on connect, click on send, and let's see what we get now. And this is our error. It says none type object is not subscriptable. And I think the error occurs over here because if we look over here, we have type. I just have to convert it into a string. So if we go to the relevance score, as you can see, this is of the type of np.float32. Maybe we cannot send this through WebSocket. So what we need to do is go to the sort source service, and when we have np dot and all of this, I'm going to wrap all of this with float. So we are essentially converting the entire np dot object that we had into a float. And I think then we should have a better response. So I can click on connect, then click on send. And now let's see if we get the response. So as you can see, we get a response over here of type search result data, title Elon Musk, and then all of the sources of data, right? That's good. Now we're waiting for the Gemini response to appear. So as you noticed, all of the data came in one after another, and that was what we wanted, but still it's not what we really want. What happened over here is that once the entire response was created, FastAPI sent all of those JSON back to us, but that's not what we want. We want to send the data as soon as we get it. And to do that, what we can do is just have await async IO. Make sure you import async IO at the top, .sleep .1. And once you do that before all of the WebSockets, it should work fine. So whenever you do anything about WebSockets, just make sure you have await async IO .sleep. So as we do that, the data will come to us as and when it's ready, not when all of the data is created and then it sends one back to us. So now I'm going to click on connect, click on send again, and now I hope to see a different rate of response. So we get the search result now. Now we're waiting for the content to appear. And now you can see the content keeps appearing in a little bit of delay. It doesn't come in directly all at once like we had before. Gemini is creating a response and then sending it to us. Earlier what happened is that we got the data, but we were storing it for some time. And after all of the responses were there, we sent it across. And because of this, it felt a little delayed. Now it's not. So yeah, we're done with the entire backend now. What we need to do is go to the front end and start working on connecting it with the UI. So the first thing I want to do is, if I go to lib, pages, home page, here, as soon as the user clicks on the search section's send button, this particular thing, I want to send a request to my backend saying, I want to connect to my backend and get the actual data, right? So let's get started with that. So the first step here would be to install a package that will allow us to connect with our backend in terms of WebSocket. And to do that, we can use this package, WebSocket client. So I'm going to copy this particular package and add it to my dependencies. Once that's done, I'm going to check if there's any installation process that I need to follow, and there isn't. So now I can go to my file explorer, and in this lib folder, I'm going to create a new folder, and let's call this services. In this services, I'm going to have my search, or let's say chat web service .dart, and then I can create a class chat web service. Now in this class, what I aim to achieve is that we have two methods. The first one is connect. This will allow us to connect to our backend, so set up the connection, and the second one is to perform search, or let's just call this chat. So in this connect part, we are going to connect to our backend and start listening to the particular WebSocket port, so that whenever the server starts sending messages to us, we listen to them and store it with us. And chat basically tells the server that, hey, listen, this send button was clicked, so send the query over to our WebSocket, and then our connect function is anyways listening to all the data. So we'll get all the data that server sends to us, right? So let's go ahead and design the connect function. Now to do this, first we need to instantiate WebSocket. So I'm going to create an instance of WebSocket over here. So we have WebSocket, and this WebSocket doesn't come from .io. This WebSocket actually comes from the package WebSocket client, and this can be nullable, and let's just make it a private variable calling it socket. Now in this connect function, what we are going to do is underscore socket is equal to WebSocket, and then we need to pass in the URI, which is URI.parse, and then we've mentioned the URL. The URL is ws://localhost 8000/ws/chat. Alright. Now if you want, you can store this in .env and retrieve the value over here, and we'll be fine. After that, the socket connection is established. Now what we need to do is listen to all the messages that would come in. So we are going to have underscore socket, and this is no longer nullable. We just instantiated it to a value. So we can do underscore socket dot messages dot listen, and this will give us a stream of values, right? So every message that comes to us, we are going to listen to it, and then let's just print it as of now. So we can just print message like this, and this way we have set up our stream. Another thing that we can do over here is, since we already know message is going to be of the type JSON or map, we can convert it into a map. The message that we get over here is going to be of the type of string, so we just convert it to a map. And why do we know it's going to be a map always? If we just go to our main.py file, you'll notice we have WebSocket.sendJSON. When we do that, we're sending in a map all the time. So we know it's going to be a map. So I'll go one step further and just do final data is equal to JSON. So make sure you import .convert.encode and then pass in the message. Actually, not JSON encode, JSON decode, because we are trying to decode the message. We're not trying to encode a message. Encode is for when we want to send. Decode will allow us to access the actual data. For example, if I want to do data at, let's say, type, because if we go to our main.py file again, every message that we send has a type, right? So that's safe to do. Also, another thing I like to do is remove this print statement. They're no longer needed. It also looks a bit unprofessional. So yeah, let's just remove it. Now we can go back to our chat web service. So our simple connect function is done. Now what we need to do is take this chat web service and call the connect function on it wherever we want to start connecting to our application. So what I'm going to do is go to the home page, and here where we have our stateless widget, I'm going to convert it into a stateful widget. After I've converted it to a stateful widget, I'm going to call the initState function, and in this initState function, I'm going to do my first thing, and that is taking the chat web service and calling the connect function on it. Alright. Now, after we do that, we don't expect anything to happen except on our backend side, we should see that connection open shows up. So what I'm going to do is start my web project now. So I'm going to run without debugging and wait for Chrome to load up with our Flutter application. So our application is now launched, and if I open up our terminal, we see connection open written over here. So that means the connection was done properly. Everything works properly. Now what I want to do is, whenever the user clicks on this button, I want to call this chat function. So that means I want to take this socket object and call the socket.send function so that we can send the data to our WebSocket. So right now we have established the connection. If I go to the main.py file, this part is completed. Now the server is waiting to receive a JSON data. So we need to send it from the client side. And to do that, we're just going to do a simple socket.send, and then we pass in the message. What is the message? It is just going to be query, and then we pass in the query that we get from the parameter over here. So we can take that and pass it in. And this socket cannot be null. But how can we be sure over here that socket is not null? We'll assume that connect is always called before chat is called. And yeah, that will be the case. We'll be assuming that. But still, there is a possibility that socket can be null, and we're going to see that error exactly. So we can go to the search section, and where we have this icons.arrow forward, I'm going to wrap my container with a widget called gesture detector. And in the on tab, I can just say chat web service. So I create an instance over here and call the chat function. Now I need to pass in the query, and to get the query, I need to attach a controller to this text field so that I can get that value. So I need to first of all convert the stateless widget to a stateful widget because we are going to have a controller, a text editing controller. So we have final query controller, which is equal to a text editing controller. And then I'm going to call the dispose function, which is why we had created a stateful widget. And then we can do query controller.dispose. Then I can take this query controller and pass it in over here where we have a text field. So we have controller and we pass in the query controller. Great. Now I can pass in the query as query controller.text.trim. Now there are other sorts of validation you can perform before calling this function, but I'm just providing a basic framework for us to work. Now I'm going to restart everything and we have connection open again. I'm going to type, let's say, chat, what is India versus Australia score? Well, now I'm going to click on send, and if I go to the debug console, we get an error over here. And we get this error because if we go to a GitHub issue, you'll notice that in Flutter 3.27 version, which I'm using, there's this error. This will be fixed in the next release or in the next hotfix, but as of now it's broken. But the thing is, it just gives a bunch of errors that pollutes the terminal. But if we search for our query, what is India versus Australia score, we do see it. So even though we get the error, the actual app is still working. It doesn't affect the actual app in our case. So we're fine with it. The issue that I want to showcase, however, is that if I open my backend terminal, we don't get this query, even though we should be getting a query, right? And the reason we don't get this query is because this socket is null. If I go ahead and print underscore socket, and then I can save it, everything will be restarted. So I'm going to type this query again, what is India versus Australia score? And now I can click on send, then go to my debug console. There's obviously a lot of data, but what I'm looking for is null. And we do see null and unexpected null value. So null was given out by this thing, and unexpected null value is because of this. Now why does this issue exist? Well, that's because if we go to the home page, we've created a new instance of chat web service over here. Since we've created a new instance, this whole thing is instantiated. That means socket is there and all of that stuff is there. It's null initially, and then we call the connect function on it. As soon as we call the connect function, this runs and socket now has a value. The connection is established. But in the search section, when we go on tap, we're creating a new instance of chat web service. Now, since we've created a new instance of chat web service, this thing again reinstantiates, and because of that, this socket is null. And since we have not called the connect function on it, the socket over here is also null. Now, how do we avoid this issue? Well, one way to avoid it is to just make this class a singleton. That means whenever you try to access this particular class, you will only get the same instance back again. And that's what we want. Even when we add future functionalities in our application, for example, we want to get the chunks of data that Gemini gives us, that will help us. Because we have only one instance we are listening to, and that's good. I only want one instance to be listened to. It will never die. And if it never dies, and I click on this page, go to a new page, I can be sure that this class doesn't die. So I keep getting the messages from my backend again and again. For example, let's say I don't make this class a singleton and I type in my query, I click on send, then I go to the search section. What's going to happen after that is we go to a new page. In the new page, Gemini starts writing its response for us. So if the class is not a singleton and we go to a new page, where will all of our data go? We are listening to the data over here, right? Where will all of that go? So a singleton will allow that this class never dies and we can keep listening to this data again and again. And no data is lost that way. So that's why we're going to convert this to a singleton. Singleton just means you have one instance of the class. So the first thing we want to do is privatize the constructor. So I'm going to take this chat web service and call the ._internal function on it. Once we do that, as you can see, we have errors both the places because it cannot be instantiated. We have privatized our constructor. Now what I'm going to do is create an instance of this chat web service class so that we can manage the instance only within the class. So what I'm going to do here is static final underscore instance is equal to, and then we're going to call this particular constructor. Once we do that, we can create a new constructor, and this is going to be a factory constructor, which is of chat web service. And any time this is called, we're just going to return this instance function. We're going to return this instance variable. And now all the errors are gone and our class is now a singleton. What have we done here? First of all, we privatized the constructor. This prevents the class from being instantiated externally, and that's why we had gotten errors over here. After that, we created an instance variable. What this does is ensures that only one object of this chat web service exists. And then we created a factory constructor which returns this instance. So whenever chat web service class is instantiated, the same instance is returned instead of creating a new object. And now if we restart everything, go back to our terminal, and now we can just say what is India versus Australia score. Click on enter. We get unexpected error occurred, connection closed, connection open. And if we go to our debug console, we get what is India versus Australia score and instance of WebSocket. That means this particular thing was called, and now our backend also gets the actual data. Now the reason we get this error, unexpected error occurred, is because I've directly sent in a map. What I need to do is encode this just like we decoded the JSON over here when we got the message. We also have to encode the message before sending it. So we can just do json.encode and then pass in this query as the parameter, and we can save it. And now we can again say what is India versus Australia score. Click on enter, open up our terminal, and if I open the debug console, we see search result once and then content 25 times. So that means even this listen part is working fine. Now we can use this chat web service to connect on one page, which is the home page, then call the chat function on another widget, and then listen to these messages or actually get the messages on some other page. So as of now, I'm going to set up the structure so that we have a concrete structure of storing the messages in our class, and then we can display it on any page we want. What I intend to do is set up stream controllers that will allow us to take whatever messages we get over here and display it on a page, and that is going to be the chat page. So we are getting the data at type over here. What we need to get is the actual content. So based on this data at type, we need to determine where to store our message. And first of all, I need stream controllers. Stream controllers will allow me to store the data appropriately. For example, if we get the search result, it goes in one stream controller. If we get the content, it should be in another controller. So it just helps us manage the process really well. So let's get started. I'm going to create two controllers. The first one is search result controller, and all of this is going to be private, which is equal to stream controller. If you want, you can also add broadcast over here. Broadcast basically means that you can have multiple listeners of the stream. With stream controller, only one subscriber of the stream can be there. After that, we're going to have a content controller. Content controller basically keeps track of all the content that Gemini is sending to us. After that, we are going to have two public getters that will expose the stream from here. So stream controllers are not exposed outside because that can be dangerous. You don't want anyone else controlling your stream. Only members within this class can modify the stream process. So here we are just going to have final, or actually we have to do stream of map of string comma dynamic because that's what we'll be returning. And then we'll have a get search result stream, and then we are just going to do search result controller dot stream. And the reason we have this error is because if you hover over it, it says a value of type stream dynamic can't be returned from this because it has a type of this. To fix this error, what we can do is give a type to the stream controller. So this stream controller has a type of map of string comma dynamic, and you can do the same thing over here as well. Then we can copy this line and paste it again. This time we are going to have content stream, and we are going to return a content controller dot stream. Perfect. Now based on this data at type, we want to add to a particular controller. So we are going to have if data type is equal to search underscore result. That means we need to add to the search result stream controller. So we can just take this search result controller and do search controller dot add in the event. Let's say this is of the type of data. So we are passing in the entire data map that we get. Else, if the data is of the type of content, then we are going to add to the content controller. So we have content controller dot add, and then again we pass in the data. Now what I'm going to do is go to the home page, and where we have this expanded widget and the footer, I'm going to add my little stream builder, and in this stream builder, I'm going to pass in the stream. The stream is going to be the chat web service dot content stream, so that I see all the data that Gemini is typing in. And then I have the builder. The builder is going to have a context and also a snapshot. Then I can save this much. And then if snapshot.connectionState is equal to the connectionState.waiting, just a boilerplate code so that if we are in the loading state, we can display a loader, or let's say a centered child with a circular progress indicator. Otherwise, what we are going to do is return text that contains this data. So we have snapshot.data at, let's say, content. So with this code, what's going to happen is that as soon as this content stream changes, this data is going to get updated. So the content is going to change. That means, let's say first we get the word India. So this is how our text is going to look like. After that, it's not going to be versus Australia like that. No. What's going to happen is India is going to get replaced by versus Australia, because that's how it works. We have just told that our text is snapshot.data at content. It is not the entire text that has already been given to us in the past. It is just a reflection of what data Gemini is currently sending to us. So to fix that, what we can do is create a string at the top, which is full response. And initially it is an empty string. After that, we can take this full response, and as soon as we get the data, we can do full response plus equals snapshot.data at content. And actually this data is not a function, so it just needs to be accessed like this. And then we can say that this data is not null. We can be sure about that. And then we say full response plus equals this. Then I can take this full response and paste it over here. So with this, the first time we get the content from our stream, it's going to be India. Then the second time, this thing is going to be versus Australia, let's say. So full response will append this particular thing. So what we had in the past plus whatever we got in the latest stream. So with this, we get the actual response display. Okay, let's save this much. And now let's get started. So I'm going to open up my terminal, and here the connection is open. That's good. What is India versus Australia score? And as you can see, this loading indicator pops up as soon as we do that, because we are still waiting for the connection. It's not done yet. It's loading. And then I can hit enter, and now the data should be here any moment. So I'm just going to stay on the screen and wait for it. So in the data, we did get null somehow. So what I would like to do over here is add a question mark that, hey, this data can be null, but if it is null, then we're going to treat it as an empty string and then append it to response. Otherwise, just take this data. So we can do it with this line. Let's save it. And now I'm going to rerun it so the connection is open. And then I can again ask for the same thing. What is India versus Australia score? Then we can click on enter. And let's wait for the response now. In the debug console, we do get these two things. That's nice. Now let's wait. So the loading indicator stops, but we don't get any data. And the reason for that is because we're not getting content over here. We're getting data. If we go to our main.py file, scroll down, here we are getting data. We're not getting content. Content is for the type. So here we need to access the particular data. Now we can save it. Open up our terminal and well, we can just start again. What is India versus Australia score? And hopefully this time we get the right response. So let's click on enter and see what happens. So yeah, this is the data that we're getting in real time and it's updating as well. That's great. And obviously we have an error because the screen overflow happened and all of those things. But yeah, we're getting the real time data from Gemini and that's good. The next thing I want to do is go on another screen and design the UI. Our backend stuff, all of our logic is now basically done. Now we just have to put everything together and display it nicely. So I'm going to close all the save files and open up my file explorer. In this pages folder, we just have to create a new page called chatpage.dart. And here we're going to start designing our chat page. How is it going to look like? So to get started, I'm going to create a stateful widget and call this chat page. Why is this a stateful widget? Because we're going to be listening to streams and I'm going to do that in the init state. I'm not going to do that in the stream builder like I did on the home page. And actually, I'm going to take all of this code out of here. We don't want to pollute our good looking home page. And instead, I'm going to put it in the chat page. Let's also comment this out. It can be useful for us to refer to this later on if we want to. And actually, I don't think we'll need that. So let's just remove it completely. Now in the chat page, we are first of all going to return a scaffold. And then I'm going to go take this chat page and put it in main.dart file. So instead of home page, now we have chat page. Only temporarily though. When we are done with the chat page designing, we'll connect the home page to the chat page so that everything works seamlessly. But as of now, while designing only, we need chat page only. Okay, so now let's design. So to design, first we must understand how should our chat page look like. So what exactly are we trying to build? This is the UI of what we are trying to build. In the side, we have a navigation bar, just like before. Then we have a text at the top, then all our sources, and then the text of Perplexity followed by a markdown that displays whatever the LLM gives us. Okay, pretty simple. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is use a row. So in the scaffold where we have body, we're going to pass in a row. In this row, we are going to have children and the first child is obviously going to be a side navigation bar, the sidebar that we created earlier. Once we have that, I'm going to go ahead and check it. And yep, this looks good. And this is our collapsible sidebar. That works. After that, what we need to do is add the content thing. Now, before we add the content thing, there is a spacing over here. And the spacing of, let's say, 100 pixels is present. So I need to add a size box that allows us to add a width of, let's say, 100. After that, we are going to have our main content place. This main content place is going to be a simple column, and in that column we will have multiple children, and the first child is going to be a text with the question that was asked. And what is that question? We are actually going to get the question from the parameter. So I'm not going to hard code it, I'm actually going to get it from the constructor. So we can do final string question and then we take it from the constructor. So we have required this dot question. After we have done that, I'm going to take this question and pass it over here. So we have widget.question, and then I'm going to style it. We're going to pass in a text style, and the style is, let's say, font size of 40. The font weight is font weight.bold. So yeah, Now I'm going to go to the main.dart file, and here where we have question, I'm going to hard code it over here. The reason I'm hard coding it over here is because when we go from the home page to the chat page, we'll be able to pass in the question, the appropriate question. So that's why I had this arrangement. Now over here, I can just pass in what is India versus Australia score. We're definitely going to get that answered today. After we have that, there we go. Now what I want to do is leave some padding all over the place. So I'm going to wrap this column widget with a padding, and let's say we wrap it with a padding of 24 instead of 8. So from all the sides, we have 24. After that, I'm going to leave some sized box of height 24. Let's leave it over here. After that, we're going to have our list of sources. And after the list of sources is done, we want to put in an answer section. So this is where the real answering will occur. So I'm going to create both of these sources and answer section in different widgets, because when we try to get all the sources, we are going to get it dynamically from our WebSocket. So whenever we get the sources, we are only updating that particular widget. We are not updating rest of the widget over here. For example, if I do an init state call over here, and then we have our stream listening. So we have a listen of stream, and then we get a data. When we get the data, we call setState. When we call setState, this entire build function will rebuild. And if this build function rebuilds, all of these components, including answer section, will rebuild. But with sources, what's going to happen is we're going to call the init state function in the sources widget itself, so that only that particular part rebuilds whenever it needs to. None of the other unnecessary rebuilds happen. And because of this, this chat page doesn't have to be stateful anymore. It can be stateless. So I'm going to convert it to a stateless widget, and we're good. So now I'm going to go to the widgets, and here we're going to have a sources section dot. This sources section is going to be pretty interesting. It's going to be a stateful widget, just like we discussed right now. We're going to have an init state. So a sources section, then we are going to have a column and a children, and the first child over here is going to be this particular icon, right? So in a column, we have a row, and in that row, we have an icon and this text widget. So we can just do row children, and the first thing is an icon, which is icons dot source outline. Then I can leave a sized box of width 8, and then we have a text that says sources. Then we can pass in a style, text style, then the font size can be 18, the font weight can be font weight.bold, and finally we can save the file. Now if we go back to our application, well, nothing shows up because we need to instantiate this sources section. So I'm going to remove this and then import this particular widget. Once we do that, we see sources with this icon. This icon is of the black color, so let's change the color. We can specify a color over here, and let's say the color is colors.white 70. Now again, if you want, you can take this color and put it in the colors.dart file. And now we have the sources section, but it's in the center, so we need to column, and here specify that the cross-axis alignment should be cross-axis alignment.start. Save it, and there's no change, but this change will occur as soon as we add the source cards. So let's get to that. After this row is done, we want to leave a size box of height, let's say 16. After that, we're going to have a wrap widget again. We're not using a row or a column, we're using wrap again, because if the sources card extend the width of how much ever width is available, we want to move to the next line. So here the spacing is going to be 16, and the run spacing is also going to be 16. So this is how much space we need to keep between the main axis, and this is how much space we need to keep between the cross axis. After that, we need to specify the children, and where do we get these children from? Now to get the sources, we will have to use the init state and listen to the stream of sources, right? In our chat web service where we had search result controller, this is the stream we'll be using to display data in this sources section. But as of now, we're not interfering with it. So we can mock and simulate the data. So what I can do here is create a variable called search results, which is equal to a list of map which contains just two properties, title and URL. So every single search result is going to have a title and a URL. And there are 3 sources over here. Now, if you want to understand how I got this data, you can simply take a screenshot of this particular page, give it to ChatGPT and tell to give a list of map with a title and a URL property, and it will give it to you so that we can just work on the UI a little bit. And the search results is going to be without an underscore, so just remove that. Now in the children, I can just do search results dot map and we'll get a result over here. For every result, what we're going to do is return a source card. So we need to create and design a source card. Our source card looks pretty simple. It is a container that is rounded with 2 elements vertically laid out. So we need a column within a container. And that's pretty easy. We can just return a container, and to ensure that this error goes away, what we need to do is convert it to a list. So what we're doing here is mapping through every search result, and whenever we get a result, we're just returning a widget from there. So we are creating a list of widgets based on these search results, nothing much. So I can specify a width of this container to be 150, let's say. Then I can specify a decoration, which is box decoration. Then I can pass in the color, which is app colors dot card color, and then a border radius. The border radius is going to be border radius dot circular, and let's say we pass in 8. After that, we are going to create a child, a column, and in this column we are going to have children, and the first child is going to be a text which specifies the title of the source. So we can just do result at title. Then I need to specify the style. The style is just a text style where we are going to pass in the font weight. The font weight is, let's say, font weight.w500. And then we need to specify the maximum number of lines. So we have max lines 2. Then I can have a constant sized box of height 8. So we are leaving spacing between the 2 things. And after that, again, we're going to have a text, but this time it's going to be a URL. Then the color is going to be colors.gray. And then the font weight is not going to be there. The font size, however, will decrease to 12. So this one is bigger, this one is smaller. Even if you see over here, the title is bigger with more font weight and the lower one is smaller. For this, the max line is going to be 1, and we're going to set an overflow, which is text overflow.ellipsis. So basically, whenever we run out of space, we're just going to put ... And we can do the same thing for the top one as well. For the title, we're going to have an ellipsis so that this also becomes dotted. And I think with this, we should be done. So let's go ahead and test it out. This is how our container looks. Well, there's only one thing missing that will make it look good, and that is the padding. So if I go to my container again and here add a padding of edge insets.all, let's say 16, save it, come back, and yep, this looks way better than what we've had before. So this looks great. Now the next thing we want to work on is the answer section. And we're going to create a separate widget for that as well, for the same reasons as sources section. It is also going to have its own stream, and if we update, only the answer section should rebuild, nothing else. So in the widgets, I can just have answer_section.dart. Then I'm going to create a stateless widget. Let's call this answer section again. Then we are going to return a column from here where we are children, and the first child is just going to be a text called Perplexity. Then it's going to have a style, text style. The font size is, let's say, 18. The font weight is font weight.bold, and we can save it at that. Now I can take this answer section and put it in my chat page. Then I can import it, and yeah, let's go back. We'll see Perplexity written out over here. It needs to be in the left hand side. So I can go to the answer section and here have cross-axis alignment of cross-axis alignment.start, just like we had in the sources section. But also here I'm going to do size box of height 24. After we have that, now we can start working on the real thing. This Perplexity will get shifted to the left hand side as soon as we add our textual data, just like the sources automatically shifted to the left hand side. So now if we go to our answer section, we can leave a size box of height 16. And now we need to display the data. And we'll not be using a simple text widget for it because we want Markdown. Basically, whatever data Gemini gives us can be put into a Markdown so that it can be better seen. It has a better formatting. It has better structure to it. If we go back to our response, here you can see these bullet points, these bigger texts. All of those are possible because of the Markdown. Now Markdown is simply what you would see in GitHub, the readme.md file that we have, that is a Markdown. So we just want to make sure that we can read this Markdown properly, and for that we have a package, and that package is Flutter underscore Markdown. So if you search for it, you'll get the package. It is created by the Flutter team itself. You can read more about it and you'll definitely gain more knowledge. That's good. But we are just going to take this Flutter Markdown package and add it to our dependency. After that's done, we can just take this Markdown and call it. With this, we'll be able to display data on our screen. As simple as it gets. So now, what data do we want to display? Well, I want to display this data that would come from Gemini again from this stream, and we are just mocking the data as of now. Now to get this mock data, what you can do is go to perplexity.ai, the actual Perplexity website, and here ask what is the score of India versus Australia. Give me detailed response. Once you do that, you'll get all of this data. You can just copy it from here and then convert the stateless widget to a stateful widget first of all, because again we're going to have streams and stuff which will be initialized in init state, and then we can create a triple string, and then I'm going to paste in all of the data that we got right now. Then I can just say this is string full response as of now. Obviously we are going to get that actual data later on, but as of now this is good enough. Then I can pass the data as full response over here as well. Save it. Go back to our Perplexity clone and our UI is destroyed. Now to fix those layout issues, what you can do is go to the chat page first of all, and here we can wrap this entire padding widget with an expanded widget. Once we do that, we're basically saying that whatever this thing is, it will take as much ever width it gets on the screen, because we are inside of a row, right? After that, we can go to the answer section and here set shrink wrap to true. Once we do those two things, we can come back and this is what we get. Well, this is good enough, but we can make it better. How? We can make this entire thing scrollable. So we can go to the chat page and wrap this entire padding widget with a single child scroll view. Once we do that, this entire thing is now scrollable. And as you can see, these citations are also clickable. So that's nice. It identifies those links. Now what I want to do is leave some space from here. As you can see, this part is completely unavailable, and that's because these are where images come in. But now we are not going to work on the image part. If you want to work on that, let me know in the comment section and I can give you the appropriate resource to add those images. It's not a big deal. If we have this basic framework laid out, you can easily add it. So if I go to the chat page, and here after the expanded widget, what I can do is add a placeholder. And in this placeholder, once we do that, it takes the entire width that we want it to. These are where images would come in if you want to add them. But also this placeholder looks ugly. So what I can do is set stroke width to 0. So there's no stroke. And the color can be appcolors.background so that it merges with the background. And with that, everything is gone. It looks good. Now I want to shift this text to the left hand side, and to do that, we can simply set the columns cross-axis alignment to cross-axis alignment.start, and yep, it goes over there. Perfect. Now I can go back to the answer section, and this height of 16 seems a little too much. I can leave a height of 6, or actually a height of nothing, and even then it looks good. Now there are special arrangements you can do with this Markdown. For example, if you want to change how the code block looks over here, you can change that. I'll show you just how we can change the code block, and you can look into further designing by yourself. So we can do style sheet, and we'll pass in a Markdown style sheet dot from theme. Then we need to pass in our own theme data over here, and my theme is just going to be theme data dot dark, and then you can call dot copy with, and here specify extra things that you want to. For example, how you want your h1 to look like, h2 to look like, h3 would look like. So h1 is just a hash in Markdown, h2 is double hashes, and h3 is triple hashes. What we want to look at is code block, right? So code block decoration, and this requires a box decoration which we can pass in. Then we can describe how this color of the background of the code looks like. So the color can be, let's say, app colors dot card color. Let's say we also want to add a border radius. You can do that by doing border radius dot circular, not all, border radius dot circular 10. And it's not a const anymore. Let's remove that. After that, we can specify the code over here. So the code is a constant text style of, let's say, font size 16. So I'm explicitly saying that my code should be of the font size 16. Now, if you want to edit any other part, change the font, or use another font family, you can use that by doing Google Fonts like we saw earlier and using the appropriate style. There are a lot of configurations you can do over here. So definitely look into that if you want to further style your app. Once we make those changes and come back over here, we get an error saying theme.text theme.bodymedium.font size is not equal to null is not true. This error occurs because we have not set the body medium text style font size, and that is what Markdown uses for our code block. So what we need to do to fix this is go to the main.dart file, and here where we have specified theme data.dark.text theme, we can just add .copy with, add the body medium style, and this can be a constant text style, let's say with font size of 15 or 16, whatever you want. And the color can be colors.white, or if we want app colors.white color. Okay, looks good. And this is still not applied over here because this text theme is passed in over here, but it's not used over here. So to fix this, we can do theme.offContext, and that's it. Once we do that, what we are saying is that go to the material app or the closest theme data that you can find, and the closest theme data is described over here because we have only described it in the material app. So it goes over there and finds out the text theme, and then it uses all of the properties that I've mentioned. Earlier I had mentioned theme data.dark mode. It wasn't accessing that particular thing that's present over here. Okay, so now if we go back, everything's fixed. And yeah, now what I want to do is link my chat page to this answer section and also display the content correctly. So let's get started with that. I'm going to close all the save files. Then I'm going to go to the main.dart first, and here remove the chat page. Instead, we are going to have the home page back again. Then I'm going to remove the import of chat page as well. Then we can go to the home page, and here when we have string full response, I want to remove that. That's not required. And now I'll go to the search section wherever the gesture detector was present here on tab. As soon as I do this .chat, what I want to do is navigate to the chat page. So I'll do navigator.offContext.push, and then we'll pass in the material page route. The builder will be context, and then we'll return the chat page from here. Then we need to pass in the question over here. So what is our question? Well, it is the query controller.text.trim. So we can pass that in. After that, we can go to the chat page, and here we are displaying the question. That's good. In the sources section, we can remove these search results. All of the mock data can now go. Instead, what we are going to have is init state. And in this init state, we are going to have our chat service. So we are going to have chat web service, and then we can call the search result stream over here and listen to it. So we'll get some data from here. We can simply do search results dot add and then pass in the data that we get at data. So if we go back to our main.py file, the place where we are sending this JSON, you'll notice we have type search result, and in the data we are passing in the sorted results. That's what we want to do. Data at data, because the sorted results contain two things, the title and the URL. If we want to confirm that as well, we can go to the sort sources function, and here we don't see anything. So we need to go to the search service.websearch function, and here we have the title and the URL. So that's what we're going to extract. And for content, we don't really care about that unless you want to open the source without going to an external browser and you just want to open it in app. So an in-app browser. But yeah, I'm not gonna worry about that. So I can simply pass in data at data. And obviously we need to do set state because a new search result was added. Now I can take this search results and obviously it was present over here. So yeah, now the next thing I'm going to do is go to the chat page again and go to the answer section. Here we are going to remove all of this full response thing that we had and it's just going to be empty. Again, we're going to add an init state function and here we can have chat web service and then we can call the content stream and listen to it. So here again, we're going to get a data. What I want to do is full response plus equals data at data. And we know this data is going to be a string. We've already looked at concatenating the full response with the data that we get over here. So yeah, now we also want to set state. So let's do that. And yeah, we're good. Let's hope everything works out. So I'm going to restart everything. Also ensure my backend is running and it's not. So let me run it quickly. And it's now running. So what I'm going to do is search. What is the score of India versus Australia match? And then I can hit enter. So we get shifted to the new page. So I'm assuming the data was sent. Now obviously stuff doesn't look good over here. But yeah, we do get the response coming in. The sources, however, don't display up. So that's an issue. We have to worry about that. But the response was great. So let's see why the sources part isn't working. Now the reason why we got that error is because there are two problems. If we go to the main.py file, here you'll notice that these sorted results are a list of dictionary. So if we go back to our sources section, what we're doing is to a list, we are adding a new list. And that's not what we want. Instead, what we want to do is search results is equal to the data at data. And another thing is that this thing is of the type of JS array. So what I'd like to do is instead of calling it a list of map of string comma dynamic, just call it a list. Then we can save it and then I can come back over here and paste the same thing. And hopefully it works this time. I'm going to open up my terminal and wait for an error. And luckily we don't get an error this time. Instead we get all the sources over here and this is the data that is being given out by Gemini. So that's cool. We get all the 10 sources over here and all the data perfectly written out. Now let's go ahead and ask a different question. Let's say, who is Elon Musk? Whatever questions we had throughout our tutorial, let's ask all of them. Now there is one thing that we need to fix and this is the initial layout. When the data is being loaded from the server, when it's processing the results, we need to have some kind of UI skeleton showing up so that the beginning part doesn't look horrible, right? And this is what we have about Elon. It tells us a lot of things with a lot of citations. That's good. So yeah, stuff works. Now we just need to polish this a little bit, and to polish it, we need a UI skeleton. Now, how do we get a loading UI skeleton when the data is being loaded from the server? Let's get into that. To get that feature, we'll be using a package called Skeletonizer. So we can take this package and install it on our system and look through the documentation of how we can use it. So what are skeleton loaders and all of those sorts of things? We know what skeleton loader is. And if you don't know, this is the demo. While the data is loading, it's just having a shimmer kind of effect over here. And when the data comes, it just appears. Alright. Now to use Skeletonizer, it just says that we need to wrap whatever layout we have with a Skeletonizer and give it a tag of enabled. If enabled is true, it will be loading. So the Skeletonizer will appear. Otherwise, it won't appear. But there's one catch over here. And the catch is the need for fake data. So in order for Skeletonizer to work, it actually needs a layout. But in most cases, the layout would need data to shape. Example, the following list view will not render anything unless user's variable is populated. Because if users is empty, none of these things will appear. So that's why the key is to pass in fake data. Like earlier in search results, we had fake data, right? We're going to bring those back so that we can display it for some time. So I'm going to paste in all the fake data that I had from earlier. And now I can scroll down and wrap my wrap widget with a Skeletonizer widget. So I'm going to wrap it with Skeletonizer and make sure you import the Skeletonizer package. Also, enabled is going to be true or false depending on whether this data over here is there or not. And for that, we can create a separate variable. So boolean is loading is equal to false initially. Then I can take this is loading and this is equal to true initially. Then I can take this is loading and set it to false as soon as we get the search results. Now I can go here and enabled can be is loading. So skeletonizer will appear if it's loading, otherwise it won't appear. Now let's see if this works. So I'm going to go to the Flutter demo, the Perplexity clone. So now we can ask our Perplexity app to generate code for Perplexity itself. And then we can hit enter. And as you can see, the sources appear with a shimmering effect. That's great. And yep, we get all the sources over here and the Perplexity response. That's great. That means this part is working. Now, if you want to make this look better, you can definitely scroll down and do your optimizations. For example, add an effect, shimmer effect, and then specify all the colors that you want. I'm just leaving it at this. The next thing I want to do is also set up the skeletonizer for our answer section. And this is going to be a bit trickier because first of all, we want to fill this up with manual data, right? So let's find some data and then paste it. After we have done that, what we need to do is wrap the markdown with skeletonizer widget. Then we have enabled switch, and then we can create a variable boolean is loading, which is equal to true initially. And then we can set state and set is loading equal to false. After that, we can specify is loading to our skeletonizer just like before. But just doing this much is not enough. There's one additional thing that we need to do, because what we are doing is full response is equal to all of these things. And as soon as we get more data from our content stream, our full response is going to be concatenated with this data at data, right? And we don't want to do that. Instead, what we want to do is set full response to an empty string as soon as we get our first portion of data. And to solve this, we have a trick that we can use, and that is if is loading is true, that means we are getting our first portion of data. So that time what we can do is set full response equal to an empty string. After that, we can do full response plus equals data at data, and then is loading is equal to false. After that, is loading is going to be false. So full response will never be an empty string ever again. And that is good for us. So yeah, I'm going to restart everything and let's see if it works. So generate code for skeletonizer in Flutter. Let's see if that works. I'm going to hit on enter, and yep, there we go. This is how our data is looking like, and that's solid. And as soon as we start getting data, everything fixes. So that's great. And also our code over here, if you'll notice, has a rounded border and is of the color or the same as our card. So that's good. So this is our Perplexity clone. If you want to add more features to this, go ahead, do that. For example, when I click on this plus icon, a thread appears over here, or there is a reply option. Basically, you can chat with it just like you can with ChatGPT. It should be fairly easy to add it. To give you a little perspective of how to go about it, you can simply go to the main.py file, and instead of just accepting a query, you can also accept a list that contains the user and the AI chatbot messages. Then you can pass it as a context to our Gemini API before generating a response. So here we have a source mentioned. We can also specify the previous context. And once we do that, Gemini will be able to answer much better. Or if you want, you can also use the code snippet that was present on aistudio.google.com. If you'll notice, we have a chat session over here, and then you can do chat session.send message. So basically you can take all of this code and put it in your FastAPI application and edit it. Should be fairly straightforward. Another thing you can implement is that when you click on this, you're taken to the particular link that's mentioned over here. All of these links are valid. You might also want to add the capability of attaching images or files. So you can do that by using this attach option, picking image or files from your application. And I think Gemini can also handle that. Now the last thing that I want to do is make this work on an iOS simulator as well. So let's see if it works first of all. So I'm going to run this on an iOS simulator and I'll see you after it's launched. So our app is now launched, and if I go to the iPhone simulator, this is how it looks. So it is working, but it doesn't look good, right? So what I want to do is remove this sidebar whenever we are on iPhone simulator. So only on web do we want the sidebar to be present. So I can go to the home page and here add a condition. The condition is that if we are on web, K is web, then we want to display a sidebar, otherwise a constant sized box. And I don't think there's a need of const anymore. Now if we come back, yep, that's how it looks, good enough. We can also wrap this column with a padding widget, and let's say the padding is 8, and we only want the padding to appear if we are not on web. So if K is web is not there, then we want constant edge insets all 8.0, otherwise we'll have edge insets .0. The same thing would go for the chat page as well. So on the chat page, we're going to have K is web, then sidebar, otherwise a sized box. Then we're going to save it, and we can put the same logic for the sized box of width 100 as well. And I'll also do the same thing for this placeholder. So I'll have K is web, not WASM, just K is web. Otherwise, we're going to have a sized box. Done. Now let's see how stuff looks. I'm just going to ask the question, who is Arvind Srinivas? Then I'm going to hit enter, and this is what we get. And that's pretty good. So the sources line up, then we have the detail showing up over here. So that's great. Everything seems to work fine, and that is the end of our tutorial. As I mentioned, there are a ton of features you can add to this and make it cool. If you want help with any of that, let me know. If you make it, let me know. And that's it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.